They say things change when you observe them. For example, my mom would look so proud at my childhood soccer games, but she'd immediately change the moment she noticed me on the substitute bench. A moment of observation, intended or not, can change everything. One summer, my parents drove me out to a nearby national park. They had a junior ranger club where kids were introduced to all manner of wildlife knowledge and survival trivia. I wasn't sure about it at first. It seemed like just another thing on a long list of nothings. But I gave it an honest shot. Along with a dozen other kids and the chemically positive ranger accompanying us, we had craft sessions, survival training, cave exploration, and all kinds of games. Unlike sports, it wasn't just about beating an opponent. This was about cooperation, to work together. Seeing us all work toward a common goal changed something in me, brought out something good. I enjoyed that. Back in July '98, all 12 junior rangers set out on a spotlight night walk along with our guide. We were to pack our own survival kit and make our way out to one of the ranger stations. There, we'd unpack and be graded based on what we'd chosen to bring. There was this excitement in the air. It was like a graduation of sorts. We were to become official wildlife student stewards, they called it. They excitedly paired us up in a buddy system, 2 by 2, and we followed the trail. It was supposed to be uneventful. The man in charge, Ranger Dan, had done that walk every summer for the past 12 years. He was prepared for a lot of things, but nature had other plans that night. I remember him holding up a hand, silently asking us to stop and listen. There was this deep groaning noise off somewhere in the dark. I heard rustling bushes and cracking saplings. I saw 2 gleaming stones reflecting the shine of our flashlights, a black bear looking back at us. It really wasn't as bad as it sounds. The bear sniffed at Ranger Dan for a bit and wandered off. But to a group of 10-year-olds, it was like staring at death itself. My buddy panicked and bolted into the woods. We're not allowed to ever leave our buddy, Starry, so I did my best to keep up with him. I yelled at him to stop, but by the time he did, we'd been separated from the rest of the group. I couldn't even see their flashlights anymore. Luckily, they used to have a system in place to help lost visitors navigate. They called it the Lady Bluebell system. All over the park, they'd wrap blue tape around the trees and tie a bell in the direction of the closest ranger station or trail. Even in the dark, you could hear a bell go off every now and then, and you could check the bell to get a direction. Spotting that blue tape immediately improved our odds of survival. We'd been taught that if all else fails, all we had to do was follow 3 simple rules. Stop, listen, look. Lady Bluebell takes you home. Those were the rules. That first moment when I realized we were lost was horrifying. I could barely breathe, like I was choking on the darkness. My buddy was having a panic attack, but I did what I'd been told to do. Stop, listen, look. Lady Bluebell would take me home. And I swear, not only did I hear that bell, I saw her. A tall woman in a blue dress off in the distance, a sun-tanned arm pointing us in the direction of the trail, long dark hair framing a brilliant smile, a warm presence in the dark of night. Maybe I remember it wrong. Maybe she wasn't really there, but I think she was. My buddy and I were probably lost for no more than 20 minutes. We made our way back to the trail. Not long after that, we spotted flashlights in the distance. The rest of the night was nothing but praise from Ranger Dan, all the hot dogs we could eat, and scary stories told by a roaring campfire. I never told anyone about seeing Lady Bluebell. Not a living soul. My mom thought that night would be the end of my interest in the Junior Ranger Club. That it did scare me away, but strangely, it had the opposite effect. I had used what I'd learned to survive to win. And this wasn't just a winning game. This was winning at life itself. I'd faced real, actual danger and lived to tell the tale. That's when I knew I wanted to be a park ranger. I got my Bachelor of Science in Forest and Natural Resource Management from MSU, worked a few different jobs, took a sabbatical, and ended up with a position at the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources in 2009. Nowadays, I'm the one running the Junior Ranger Club. Ranger Dan retired back in 2018, but still volunteers for the club in the summer. I've acquainted myself with the area for over a decade. I'm confident when I say I know my way around. I know what animals roam which areas, and I can tell by the shifting seasons what is to come. I know how flash floods smell, and I can tell by the taste of the air when a lightning storm is coming. Still, every now and then, Mother Nature surprises me, and sometimes she gives way to something different entirely. The park has changed a lot too. The Lady Bluebell program, for example. Over the years, it evolved into a sort of mascot. She was portrayed as this radiant woman in a blue summer dress. She also had her sidekicks, like the mischievous Ricky Raccoon and the ever-somber Sunny the Sad Sunflower. There were comic books, trading cards, stamps, merchandise. She was a beloved icon. They hired a woman to dress like her every summer, to welcome the junior rangers and teach them the system. Lady Bluebell was our Smokey the Bear, telling kids how to behave in the park to keep themselves and others safe. I loved it. Long after the Junior Ranger Club came to an end, I still collected all sorts of Lady Bluebell memorabilia. But there were issues. Over time, some visitors to the park began stealing the blue tape, keeping it as a souvenir. Others just took the bell. Some moved the bell around, purposefully pointing it in the wrong direction. Over time, the effort and resources required to constantly fix the system started to outweigh the benefits. They officially ditched the Lady Bluebell Takes You Home motto in 2008 and retired the mascot entirely in 2011. I was sad to see her go, but it made sense. It just wasn't practical anymore. Times change. Now that you know me a little better, I want to tell you about one particular incident, something I haven't been able to share with my friends and colleagues. It was late August. I was following our southeasternmost trail, mapping the movements of an elk herd. The leaves were just about to change color, and there was a tinge of cold in the air. Branches had started making snappier sounds, and the days were rapidly growing shorter. Autumn was just around the corner. That day, I was ready to head back when I spotted a plume of smoke just off my trail. Nothing big, possibly a campfire. I decided to give it a once-over, just in case. I came upon a small camp, a roughly-looking one-man tent, neon orange. A hastily constructed campfire with what looked like a grilled squirrel. I caught a whiff of sweat coming off the tent, giving me the impression that whoever lived there had been around for a while. Looking at their choice of meal, I figured, maybe a bit too long. "Hello?" I called out. "Anyone here?" I heard a shout in response and hurried footsteps, someone falling, getting up, and then sprinting in my direction. At first, I was taken aback, thinking it might be a wild animal. Seconds later, a young woman crawled into camp. The best word to describe her was disheveled. Her hair was a tangled mess, and she was deeply sunburnt on her arms and face. Her lips were dry and pale, and her hands kept shaking. The moment she saw me, her eyes welled up with tears. "Yes," she cried. "Jesus Christ, yes!" She got up and flung her arms around me, crying onto my shoulder. Not just a sob either, but a full-on wail. She tried to say something, but every other word got stuck in her throat. "Did I make it?" she sniffled. "Am I out?" I sat her down, offered her some water, and asked her to calmly explain what had happened. "I just can't believe my luck," she said. "I thought it was all over." I choked on my words. Nothing had prepared me for this. We weren't out looking for anyone. We hadn't been for months, maybe years. "It's okay," I said. "Let's pack you up. Let's get you home." Her name was Anna Baker. She'd been part of a company retreat and got lost somewhere along the way. She figured she'd been on her own for about 2 weeks, but there was no way to tell for sure. "The days kind of blend," she sighed. "You keep walking, and it might have been an hour or 2 days. It kind of messes with your head." She was malnourished and dehydrated. I didn't think she had the strength to make it back. The closest ranger station was quite a way off. I asked if I could help her carry something, but she just brushed me off. "I got this," she insisted. "Please, just get me home." We got back on the trail and started making our way back. I took up my radio to call it in. "I used to come out here all the time," Anna said. "I never thought I'd get lost." "It happens to the best of us," I smiled. "You made it, that's what counts." I thought I did it right. I stopped, listened, and looked. Follow the bells, all of it. We don't do that anymore, I replied. I told Anna about how the Lady Bluebell program had been discontinued over a decade ago. I complained about the sabotaged bells, the stolen tape, and all the stupid things tourists had done over the years. Frankly, I found it strange she'd found any bells at all. I hadn't seen them in years. But there were more immediate concerns. I'd never had trouble with my radio before, but now it was dead as a doornail. I brought out my backup batteries, but the radio stayed silent. Still, Anna was in better shape than I'd anticipated, so I figured we'd make it back by nightfall if we kept a good pace. About 200 feet down the trail, something started to feel wrong. The trail should have turned by then, heading west. Instead, it kept going north. Looking around, I couldn't see any of the usual landmarks. We continued for another 10 minutes, only to see the trail suddenly stop. Not slowly disappear into the moss, but stop altogether. There were no trails like that. Not on that hike. Not for as long as I'd been there. I wasn't taking any chances, and there was no point dwelling on it. The radio was busted, so I picked up my flare gun. It was only one shot, so I had to make it count. I aimed it up, asked Anna to step back, and fired. The light soared into the sky with a whoo, bathing the treetops in an intense red glow. Those things are louder than you think. It's nothing like the movies. Now we sit tight, I said. They can't find us if we keep moving, so we buddy up. Anna smiled. That's what you're supposed to do, right? That's right, I nodded. You a junior ranger? Anya made herself comfortable on a log and took a swig from my canteen. Lady Bluebell takes you home, she sighed. She shook her head and handed back my canteen. A twinkle in her eye came and went. Not anymore, it seems. We stayed out there for hours. We shared a protein bar, and Anya helped me set up a campfire. To my surprise, there was a stream nearby. There wasn't supposed to be, but there was. We boiled some water, refilled my canteen, and made ourselves comfortable. It could be hours before someone got to us. It didn't take long for the sky to turn black. I figured no one would find us in the dark, so we set up camp. Anya had her tent, and I had a hammock. We both went to bed early, but I couldn't get any sleep. My new buddy was out cold, though. I guess the excitement of seeing a person for the first time in weeks was enough to wear her out. I, on the other hand, was anxious about not finding my way back. It didn't make any sense. I'd walked that trail 1,000 times. Somewhere in the space between the waking world and an uneasy sleep, I remember thinking about Lady Bluebell. Her 3 rules were simple. Stop, listen, look. First, to stop so you don't get more lost than you already are. Second, to listen. The sound of the bells usually travels much further than the sight of the blue tape. And the third rule, to look, was a reminder to identify which way the bells were positioned. I remember thinking that we'd already done the first part. We'd stopped. A part of me wanted to listen like I'd done back when I was a kid. To hear that bell and find my way back. As sleep faded from my mind, my eyes drifted into the dark. I noticed a strip of blue tape wrapped around a nearby tree. Strange that I hadn't seen it before. Maybe it wasn't there until I started to look for it. Anya was awake long before I was. She'd heated a bag of chickpeas from my pack and sliced up some salami. Simple stuff, but all you needed to keep going. I went to refill the water canteen again, but couldn't find my way back to the stream. Realizing it just wasn't there anymore made my blood run cold. I wasn't used to doubting myself. I knew these woods like the back of my hand, and suddenly it felt like I'd found an extra finger. None of this made any sense. I checked my map and double-checked my compass. There was nothing even close to a landmark in our vicinity. No obvious elevations, lakes, or rivers. I was running out of options. It took me a moment to realize that Anya was staring at me from across the campfire. Having picked up on my anxious fiddling, she gave me a reassuring smile. I saw her once, she said. Back when I was a junior. It's not uncommon, I added. Lots of kids think they see her. We all made her up in our minds, trying to convince one another that she was real. No, I mean I really saw her, dress and all, tall as hell. Anya finished up her last spoonful of chickpeas. I was out fetching firewood. I wasn't even lost. She just stood there, looking at me. Shadows can play tricks on us. No, see, that's the thing, Anya laughed. It was the middle of the day. We waited all day long, morning, afternoon, and long into the night. Still not a soul to be seen. No flares going up, no sounds in the distance. It was just me, Anya, and miles of forest. A forest that should be familiar to me, but somehow wasn't. We decided that come morning, we would make our way back on our own. Heading straight north should bring us to one of the main trails, no matter our approaching angle. I couldn't bring myself to tell Anya that I too had seen Lady Bluebell. After all these years, I still couldn't believe it, even though it had been just as clear as the way Anya had described it. That night, I stayed up listening to the howling wind. I tried to ignore it, but I couldn't. I couldn't help but listen. And the more I tried to avoid it, the more I heard it. There, hidden in the breeze, was something else. Distant bells, urging me to look for Lady Bluebell. The next day, we packed up and got moving. Anya was much better off than when I first met her. Having snacked on most of my backup rations, I still had some left, but we'd have to start foraging soon. Still, the trail shouldn't be more than a few hours out, at most. But then again, nothing seemed to be where it ought to anymore. We hiked through a clearing, stepping over collapsed trees and needling the grass. Then I spotted something in the distance. I waved Anya over and we took a detour. It was one of our old stop, listen, look signs. I hadn't seen one in years. It was a bit roughed up but still legible. However, it had been slightly altered. Someone had added "don't" to every line with bright blue paint. Don't stop, don't listen, don't look. Lady Bluebell won't take you home. Did you? I began. Anya interrupted. That's new. We came to the same conclusion. We weren't alone out there. We continued north, but I couldn't help the feeling that there was something off about the whole area. I started to notice little details all around, broken branches and paths in the grass. There was a spot next to a large rock that looked like someone had been sleeping next to it. The tracks were pretty distinct. I even found a few footprints, and Anya swore she'd never been there before. By late afternoon, I was getting worried. Not only had there been more footprints and tracks, but they were getting fresher. We slowed our pace, and I started to take a better look around. I needed to get an estimate of just how many others were out there. I was following the tracks of about 3 people when I saw another clearing ahead of us. It took me a few moments to realize that we had effectively walked in a circle. We were back at square one. I could even see the stop, listen, look sign in the distance. I brought out my compass, took Anya by the arm, and stormed off. We had to try again. I don't know when or where we got turned around, but we couldn't stop now. We kept going north, and this time I didn't put away my compass for a second. We settled into a steady jog, making sure the clearing stayed behind us. Anya kept a steady pace, even if she made a lot of noise. At one point, we stopped to drink some water. I looked back for a second. I wanted to see something in the distance. I couldn't tell what it was, but it was standing upright. No, not just standing, running. At first, we didn't understand what we were looking at. It took me several seconds to realize it was even human. A young man, no older than 17, maybe 18. Rough hair, with cuts all over his legs and arms. He was only wearing a pair of torn jeans, darkened by weeks of built-up dirt. He didn't run like people usually do. He was hunched over and flailing with his arms. He kept doing this strange motion with his neck, like a bobblehead, never standing still. As he got closer, I could hear this constant mumbling. Not a scream or a whisper. It was like he was trying to manically force little words into every exhaled breath. I couldn't hear what he was saying. I only understood that it was repeating. Anya backed away, but it was clear that he was headed straight for us. That's when I noticed the sharpened flint in his hand. Before I realized what was about to happen, he charged us. He went for Anya first, but she was too quick for him. As she ducked behind a tree, I moved to intercept. I grabbed my camping shovel from the side of my backpack and took a wild swing. As our attacker turned to face me, my swing clocked him right across the side of his face. There was a deeper cut than I'd expected, severing parts of his ear. He reeled back and fell over. He struggled to regain his balance, but the head trauma made his eyes spin. His mouth kept opening and closing like a fish out of water, forming the same words over and over again. Don't stop. Don't stop. Don't leave. Listen. His eyes locked onto mine. His pupils widened as a shiver worked its way into his voice. Shaking his head, a tear escaped him. Don't look, he quivered. Don't look. His eyes flicked to something off my side, a piece of tape hanging off a broken tree. As I tried to assess his wound, he burst into movement. No longer able to run straight, he toppled into a bent-over gallop, bracing himself against trees and stumps as he fled in a panic. I heard branches snapping long after he was out of sight. Anya just stood there, frozen. I tried to put my hand on her shoulder, but she reflexively slapped it away. I could see she was on the verge of hyperventilating, barely holding on. Just give me a second, please. After that, we slowed down. I kept hearing noises in the distance, mumbled words and snapping twigs, and sometimes, when there was a gust of wind, there'd be bells. Sometimes one, sometimes several. But we stayed on course, moving north. As night fell, I realized that I didn't want to stop. Whenever I stopped, the sounds would get louder. The bells would get closer. Whatever lurked in the dark seemed to gain on us. Even though nothing leapt out at us and there were no more attacks, I had this constant sense of unease, like sleeping in gasoline right next to a wobbly candle. Anya wasn't faring much better. She sat next to our campfire for hours, slowly rocking back and forth. Sometimes I'd see her snapping her head in one direction or the other, as if reacting to a sudden noise that only she could hear. I twisted and turned for hours, barely keeping my eyes shut. It felt like the night would never end. The more I thought about it, the slower time seemed to move. I remember staring up at the night sky, waiting for the moon to come into view. It never did. Anya told me she would wake me up before going to sleep so we could take turns keeping watch. It didn't do me much good, though. I was just as awake as she was. I got about an hour's worth of sleep, all in all. Anya didn't get anything. She didn't even bother to set up her tent. When I finally got up, it was still dark out. I checked my wristwatch, but it had stopped just before midnight. Anya was still up, staring into the cinders of the campfire. We had plenty of firewood, but she just couldn't be bothered to put them on. I got up from my hammock and stretched. It's been more than a couple of weeks, said Anya. Time stopped making sense long ago. What was the last date you remember? Late July, I think. That's not too bad, I smiled. Just a couple weeks out. I dug out the remaining salami from my pack and cut myself a slice. I sat down across from her at the other end of the campfire. I put a log on and watched the fire crackle back to life. Then something whispered in the back of my mind, an obvious question that I hadn't considered up until now. It had been too absurd to ask. What year? Anya and I locked eyes. I could see a stark realization boiling in the back of her mind. I repeated the question. What year, Anya? Who's the president? She didn't respond. Something cold crawled up my spine as a thought settled in. I didn't know who the hell was sitting across from me or what they'd really seen. Where were we even going? We should pack up, she said, breaking the tension. It's still dark out. Sometimes it stays that way for a while. As Anya packed up, I felt deflated. She was holding something back. If we were to make it out in any capacity, we needed to work together, follow the buddy system. Anya, you're not making any sense. Sometimes it stays dark. She breaks the rules to keep us here. What are you talking about? I've been here so long, I don't know what's real anymore, she said. I thought I could trick myself into forgetting, but she won't let me. She's there. She's always there. I didn't say anything. Anya kept pacing back and forth, scratching the back of her head. I wrote the damn sign, she growled, because when you stop, she's there. When you listen, you hear her. And when you look, would you look? Anya grabbed my shoulder and turned me around. Would you look? There she is. At first, I didn't see anything. Maybe I didn't want to, but there was that gnawing doubt in the back of my mind. Something in my reptile brain telling me I was looking for something. Slowly, the shadows twisted. They bent out of shape, forming something new with every blink of my eye. A picture created itself in the distance, a vague silhouette of a bone-thin woman. A few tufts of hair clung to a decrepit scalp. A broken jaw hung like a loose thread, swaying back and forth with a sudden breeze. A sour smell wafted my way, coating my tongue with a spike of ammonia. And of course, there it was, her signature blue dress, assuring to one and all there could be no mistake. Lady Bluebell. Anya, what is? I looked back only to see Anya backing away. She was packed and ready to go. She'd taken my canteen, and I could see my pack lying open next to the campfire. There was a palpable fear in her eyes, like a wild animal. I can't let her take me, Anya wheezed. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Before I got the chance to process what she'd done, a sound cut through the forest breeze. Bells. So many bells. I turned to see the broken woman towering over me. She was so much taller than expected. My legs buckled as I looked up at no less than a 9-foot-tall monstrosity. Her torn blue dress was lined with bells that chimed against every branch and root she passed over. She wasn't going to let me leave. She refused to be forgotten. I shouldn't have stopped, or listened, or looked. I stepped back, and she stepped forward, her feet barely touching the ground, floating inches above the moss. Her ivory eyes burrowed into me, shrieking with desperation. She wouldn't let me go home. She couldn't. I turned to flee. I ran and jumped and crawled and forced myself past every obstacle. I snagged my foot on fallen rocks, tumbled down a sudden slope, dropping half my gear. I stepped through a shallow mere, drenching myself in cold water up to my knees. I bloodied my hands and feet and face, but I kept going. And somewhere along the way, the sun rose. Wheezing for air, I realized I couldn't hear the bells anymore. But the moment I stopped to listen for them, I heard one. No, I yelled out loud. No, 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 stop. Stop thinking. I bit down on my thumb and screamed. I shouldn't listen. I shouldn't stop either. I had to keep going. It all reminded me of what my teachers had said years ago, how the world changed when we observed it. Maybe if it wasn't for people coming to listen and look, there would be nothing to see there. Maybe by keeping people around, a part of her collective self remains. I don't know how long I was out there, at least a couple of days. I kept moving, stopping only for short bursts of rest. Sometimes I'd dream of bells, and I'd wake to hear them. The slightest thought of Lady Bluebell drew her to me like a moth to an open flame. I'd hear the bells long before I saw her, but one would always accompany the other. She was always there, a stray thought away. I survived by eating boiled pine cones, roots, and eggs from warbler nests. I tried to track my progress, but there was no way to navigate. I'd either end up where I came from or going in the wrong direction. I saw that same sign in that same clearing at least a dozen times. Don't stop. Don't listen. Don't look. My feet chafed, and I'd grown a solid beard from the stubble. Having barely slept, I was having trouble shaping cohesive thoughts. I remember sitting by a stream, not knowing how I got there. Maybe the same stream I'd seen that first day of meeting Anya. I was wringing out my socks and trying my best to ignore my shivering hands. I felt so weak that I couldn't remember what strength felt like. Just getting back on my feet felt like such a monolithic task. I couldn't force myself to do it. I resigned myself to sitting there with one naked foot in the ice-cold water. My skin color faded as my blood pooled from a painful purple to a sickly blue. It took me a few moments to realize I wasn't alone, but it wasn't Lady Bluebell. It was Anya, just across the stream. She looked at me with this air of pity, apologetically even. It took me a few seconds to notice the makeshift spear she'd whittled using the Swiss Army knife from my pack, no doubt. I really am sorry, she said. After she feeds, she calms down. When she's calm, you can get out. I had to bring someone new in. The others are too fast, too clever. I didn't even care. I couldn't bring myself to curse or scream. I just hated Anya and what she turned me into. I kept my eyes on the stream, watching the water turn my foot a new tint of blue. Just take a nap, she said. Lean back and let it happen. No fuss, no drama. I barely listened. All I could think of was that tinge of blue forming at the edge of my toe. It made me think of her. It made me think of bells. It made me look for her. That's it, said Anya, readying her spear. I'll just give you a little tap to make sure we won't have any problems. I looked down at my hands, covered in scabs and bruises, my wet socks clinging to my thigh. Suddenly, a pain shot through my left leg, a quick jab from her spear, and my body exploded with damaged nerves. It was as if a burst of electricity shot through me, forcing me out of my lethargy. As my blood mixed with the stream, I could feel my heart beating out of my chest. I crawled backwards, unable to put any weight on my leg. Anya backed away, staying just close enough to make sure Lady Bluebell was properly fed. And the lady was already there. Maybe I had listened too long, or looked too hard. Maybe it was just the blue tint of my toe. Whatever it was, my thoughts had drawn her to me. And this time, I couldn't run. I heard the bells dragging my way and saw a long shadow cover the ground. I looked back for a moment, catching a glimpse of her dead eyes coming my way. Lady Bluebell didn't take you home anymore. I couldn't run. But I had to try something. Anything. I tied my wet sock bottoms together into a makeshift blindfold and put it on as tight as I could. I pushed my wet fingers into my ears and screamed. I figured that if I couldn't listen or look, maybe she'd be less interested in feeding on me. I focused on the pain in my leg as hard as I could, letting it envelop my thoughts. I knew she was closing in. My pulse went haywire, begging me to panic, to look back, to listen for threats and run, to know what to expect and prepare myself. But I didn't. There was the soft touch of cloth against my head. Little pieces of metal, bells, dragged across my body as Lady Bluebell passed me by. She didn't care for someone who couldn't look or listen. But Anya could. Anya did. Keeping the sock blindfold on, I flopped to my belly. I kept my fingers in my ears, screaming until my throat was raw. I felt the thumping on the ground as something was dropped, and quick footsteps in rapid succession. Someone was running. Then a sudden stop. For what felt like an eternity, it was just me and my thoughts. Maybe she got away. Maybe we both made it. Then something meaty bumped into me, something warm and wet. It splattered onto my clothes and stained my face, drowning the air with a stench of blood. There was a reverb in the air, like the vibration of a scream. But I didn't turn to look. I didn't turn to listen. And I refused to stop. Hours later, I made myself a crutch. I pressed wet moss into my ears and kept the blindfold tight. Blind and deaf, I forced myself forward. It was just inches at a time, and every step of the way shot through me like a bolt of lightning. And somewhere along the way, I felt a solid trail under my feet. Taking off the blindfold, I started to notice familiar landmarks. My clock started ticking. My radio burst to life. I was back on familiar ground. Maybe Anya had been right. Lady Bluebell was more relaxed after a feeding. Civilization was just around the corner, waiting for me to observe it once again. I'd been gone for 6 weeks. It was none other than Ranger Dan that came across me, leading a troop of junior rangers across the same trails as all those years ago. And yes, he had hot dogs. Now that some time has passed and my leg has healed, I've retreated to an administrative position. I keep my exposure to the park minimal. I haven't told anyone about what really happened, not only because it sounds completely insane, but because knowing about it might actually put them in danger. I might not get along with everyone, but I wouldn't wish for anyone to come looking for Lady Bluebell. Anya Baker was indeed reported missing from a company retreat about 8 years prior. The strange young man was a mystery. No one matching his description had been seen for years. Looking back at it, it feels so obvious. Anya had been so frantically preoccupied with fighting her way forward that she never really considered the very first rule. Just stop. Perhaps there is some greater lesson to be learned. There were so many of us that never wanted Lady Bluebell to leave. We stopped along the trails to listen and look, hoping some part of her was still out there. Maybe we were just looking for our childhoods. I know I was. I believe that she was some collective consciousness of belief remaining in a forgotten part of what the park used to look like. A creature we all made and abandoned, like the ghost of someone who never truly was. Maybe the world changes when we look at it. And sometimes it changes when we don't. And in the deep dark of those unseen chasms, things still grow. Unheard, unseen, and unstoppable. A man once paid me to be hunted for sport. I had stumbled across his post when I was browsing the web for work. I was looking for some sort of side gig to pass the time. I was at a bit of a crossroads in my life. I had quit my previous job to break away from the redundancy it had sucked me into. It was a spontaneous decision with no real-life planning. Luckily, in this day and age, the internet caters to people like me, people who don't care about chasing money or don't want to be tied down. It wasn't the money I was after, but the change it would provide. I felt like I couldn't enjoy anything in life, like I was just going through the motions. That night, I had been scrolling for quite some time, skimming over job posts, help wanted here, shorthanded there. I didn't think I would find anything that would suit me. It all seemed like the same thing disguised under a different title. That was until I found this particular ad. I thought it was a scam at first, comical dollar signs on each side of the Craigslist title, like a trap set for the elderly in search of credit card numbers. I clicked on it anyway, curiosity getting the better of me. In all caps, the posting read, "Big money for manhunt volunteers." At least it was to the point. The details below gave a brief introduction as to what the job entailed. I skimmed them over with amusement, half of me doubting if it was true, the other half kind of hoping it was. As ridiculous as the prospect was, I had to admit it was exciting. There were some requirements for the job, however, and I was surprised to find that I fit the bill. Must be male. Must be young and fit if possible. Must not be afraid of the dark. Must come alone. No cell phones, no firearms, no police. Must meet the night before to discuss further. The list went on for a while, but ultimately ended with a phone number and a typed signature from someone simply named Bob. I found myself thinking it over. I didn't exactly have anything to lose, no family or friends. I always lived alone. The idea of wanting to pack up at a moment's notice never seemed to sit well with any of the significant others I had in the past. I don't know if it was stupidity or the need for adventure, but in the end, I found myself grabbing my phone. I mean, how often do people get to say they were hunted for sport? The money wouldn't hurt either. I gave him a ring. The man who answered the call was tipsy but eager, and when I mentioned my interest in his post, he seemed to be ecstatic, like I was calling to give him the lead role in a movie. The conversation was a little awkward considering the reasoning behind the call itself, but after a few minutes of cryptic back and forth, we agreed on a meeting place. I was a few towns away, but he insisted I meet him closer to his side of the woods. The hunt would be at his estate, and I should stay in town so I was well rested for the event. We would meet at a local bar called the Sixth Shot to discuss terms and conditions. He seemed determined, like he had been waiting for someone for a while. He said he would understand if I was in no hurry, but with my current status of unemployment and lack of overall plans, I found myself meeting his energy. I had to admit the concept was a little exciting, if it was real at all. We decided to meet the next day. The Sixth Shot was a bustling little place. A neon sign with a smoking gun made it easy to find. When I arrived, I found the guy immediately. He looked about how you'd expect a manhunter to look. He pulled it off well. A black polo and tan cargos, a shiny shaved head with a thick curled mustache, all worn on a very tan and muscular body. He was sitting at the bar alone, and he lit up like a Christmas tree when he saw me. Like he knew. He patted the stool next to him like he was welcoming a long-lost friend. When I crossed the bar, I was met with a firm handshake and a pat on the shoulder. He told me he was delighted to meet me, and drinks were on him. After a brief introduction, he got a glass of top-shelf bourbon for himself, while I sipped on an Irish red ale. I had acquired a taste for it recently. Considering he was trying to hire me with the intent to murder me, he sounded like a pretty cool guy. We got to know each other a little before getting to the serious stuff. The people around, enjoying their drinks, were none the wiser. The man known as Bob was actually Robert Callahan, a man born into a world of wealth and, as it seemed, perpetual boredom. His father ran a very successful chain of automotive stamping companies that he inherited from his grandfather. By the time his father passed, there were so many buildings and people assigned to making the gears turn efficiently across the globe without his input. He was able to live a life of leisure on a seven-figure income without as much as lifting a finger. The companies ran themselves as he got older, and he filled his adult years with seeking thrills across the globe. He tried anything that got his adrenaline pumping, from skydiving to whitewater rafting. He took a liking to hunting, which he said had started an escapade of finding the world's most dangerous predators and killing them, no matter the cost. He said he had seen it all, but in all his years, there was one thing he hadn't bagged: a human. I laughed at his extraordinary lifestyle, feeling a bit mundane when it was my turn to share stories. Mine was far from exciting. I left the more boring bits out, but I told him I spent most of my 20s as a park ranger. It kept me close to nature and the outdoors, but when it's all you look at, it tends to lose its luster. I left that to be a cab driver in a big city, something that kept me in transit and entertained for a while. Always moving, with so many people to observe in the busy city life. But in time, I found myself too contained to the city itself, which is why I recently quit. This brings me to about where I was right now, discussing being hunted by another man. He was fascinated, jotting down notes in a little pocketbook while he sipped his bourbon. We conversed for a time. I finished a couple of beers, and he ordered another pour of bourbon. The conversation was nice. It had been a while since the last time I went out with friends. Despite the fun I was having, we couldn't beat around the bush forever. When it came time to discuss the actual terms of our agreement, his face turned serious. I would be paid $5,000 tonight. Granted, I still wanted to go through with it. He said this would help me settle accounts before the event. He said he owned a mansion outside of town with over 30 acres of forest land. He was outside city limits. His nearest neighbor was 6 miles away. No one would hear screams or gunshots. We would start tomorrow night. I was supposed to get to his estate at 10 p.m. After my arrival, I would get 15 minutes to head into the forest as a head start. He explained when the 15 minutes were up, he would promptly signal with a flare. If I had any second thoughts, I needed to address them and withdraw from the woods before the signal. If I was still in the woods when the flare went off, I would be shot on sight. He said I would be paid $10,000 an hour if I survived. The hunt would go on until dawn, and if I was still alive come daybreak, I would be free. He would be armed with a hunting rifle and a combat knife. I would be armed with my wits. It was evident it wasn't in his plans for me to survive. But that was something I had already come to terms with. He studied my face when he said these things, perhaps trying to gauge my reaction. I tried my best to play it cool, despite being a little nervous. "Does any of this bother you?" he eventually asked, downing the last of his drink. "No, not really. I've always just tried to go with the flow. Doing that made me stumble upon your offer. Maybe if I get out and live a little, it'll encourage me to settle down for a bit more. That is, if I make it out alive." I winked, and we both had a laugh. "You're a riot. If I wasn't trying to kill you, I think we'd be pretty good friends." After all the details were ironed out, he paid the tab, and it was time for us to take our leave. We shook on it before going our separate ways. He was excited for the next day, a pep in his step carrying him to his obnoxiously lifted truck. He burned out as he left, almost rear-ending a Buick as he left the parking lot. I watched him go, feeling oddly serene in the cool night air. It was hard to describe. There was no one waiting for me to come back, no one to give me a courtesy call if I didn't show up. I didn't know if it was the thrill of the challenge or the drastic break in monotony. I spent my life trying not to be a creature of habit. Maybe this would be the last shift off course, or maybe tomorrow I would die and not have to worry about it anymore. With the moon shining bright and the cool breeze on my neck, I decided I would take a walk before sleeping in my car for the night. It might be my last time to enjoy a night like this. The next day, I woke in the backseat of my car, feeling oddly rejuvenated despite my choice of bed for the night. Through the blinding afternoon rays, I found my phone and checked my bank account. He was a man of his word. The $5,000 had been wired as promised. I decided I would go into town, indulge in some of the local variety, and find a place to shower before meeting Robert at the estate. I climbed into the front seat and left the parking lot on my way into town. I called my landlord and canceled my lease. I was already living in and out of boxes, and my lease was month to month, so I wouldn't exactly be missed. After getting something to eat, I called and canceled all my utility accounts, electricity, internet, stuff like that. I had already put in my resignation at the cab company. There wasn't really any ties to my life at my apartment. I would either survive till dawn and get the biggest payday of my life, or not have to worry about the next step if I failed. Either way, this was the end of the current chapter of my life. After spending the day driving around town, I found myself heading over to Robert's property. The sun was already making its way into the horizon. His driveway was long and winding, leading to a gigantic house that looked like the surrounding forest was trying to swallow it. When I pulled up, it was already almost dark. A butler greeted me at the mansion, an old man carrying a silver tray covered in a soft cloth. He opened the car door and let me out, introducing himself only as Charles. "I will be taking your belongings now," he said. "If you don't make it out, they'll be destroyed at sunrise." He held out the tray. "Of course," I said, handing over my phone, wallet, and keys. After placing them on the tray, he offered a smile. "Would you like a refreshment before heading in? Mr. Callahan's staff will accommodate you before heading into the forest. He truly appreciates you answering his ad." "I'm fine. Thank you. I guess I'd rather just get to it," I said, wiping my sweaty palms on my jeans. "Of course. If you'll just follow me, it's right this way." He gestured for me to follow him. Charles escorted me through the house. The inside was furnished top to bottom with luxurious wooden furniture, bearskin rugs, chandeliers made of gold, and paintings from the Renaissance era. The estate was definitely worth a fortune. We passed by a trophy room filled wall to wall with mounts of animals from across the globe. They seemed to stare with their glass eyes, following us as we made our way through. Charles made no effort to engage in conversation, and neither did I. The other end of the mansion consisted of a large patio waiting for us. There was Robert, who seemed to be preparing for a little hunt. He was running a large combat knife over a whetstone slowly and methodically as we approached. Propped up next to him was a rifle, the bolt pulled back, several cartridges laid out on the glass table next to it, and the flare gun. "The time is approaching," said Charles, and Robert nodded. He wiped the blade off and sheathed it on his belt. I looked at his loadout on the table, starting to feel sick to my stomach. This was seriously happening. Now that I was here and seeing him fully prepared, I couldn't help but feel like I was in over my head. Robert stood and grabbed his rifle. He picked up each .308 cartridge and loaded them slowly, one at a time, until it was full. He racked the bolt forward, slung the rifle on his shoulder, and grabbed the flare gun. 15 minutes. Then flare, he said. "Having second thoughts?" he asked, twirling the flare gun on his finger. "No, not really," I said, making my way off the patio. I wasn't exactly sure what to say in a situation like this, so I figured it was best just to get going. "Excellent. I'll see you on the other side," he saluted me, and Charles gave me a nod. I turned and left the patio, making my way into the woods. Each step got heavier as I approached the trees, the darkness behind them getting eerier the closer I got. When I reached the tree line, I looked back at the mansion. Robert and Charles just watched expectantly. I swallowed and ducked in, feeling the full weight of my decision, perhaps a little too late. Once the mansion was no longer visible, I started jogging. I was mindful of my footsteps. A stray log or vine could trip me up. During my time as a park ranger, I spent dozens of hours hiking trails. I would survey the land weekly, picking up discarded things like trash and lost clothing. This landscape was much different, however. The ground was uneven, years of collecting leaves, buried and fallen limbs, and jagged rocks. I was wearing decent boots, but the terrain was unforgiving. One misplaced step, and I could roll or break an ankle. I wouldn't be able to rush too much, so I maintained a steady pace, hoping to put enough distance between us and maybe find a decent place to hide. With the sunset and no light source, I couldn't see very far in front of me. I tried not to think about how much time had passed. I just focused on pushing forward. The trees started to crowd, giant maples with lush branches blocking the moonlight. I ducked under them quickly. A twisted branch snagged my shirt, and I shook it loose. Birds screeched and roused from their perch, flapping away in a panic at my presence, their cries echoing into the night, sending a chill down my spine. There's nothing to be afraid of, I thought to myself. Not yet, at least. I came to a small clearing and took a second to catch my breath. I leaned on a tree, shaking clumps of mud and pine needles from my boots. The ground was wetter than I had anticipated. Off in the distance behind me, there was an echoing pop, and I looked to see the flare reaching toward the sky, a little orange ball of fire. I pushed off the tree and continued. I had to keep moving. I ran across the clearing, each step squished on the ground as I went on. My third stride, my boot stepped on something awkward and hard. By the time I heard the clicking sound, I knew it was already too late. The sudden force clamped down on both sides of my ankle. I could do nothing but cry in pain. I stumbled awkwardly to the ground, agony shooting through my leg as the wind was knocked out of me. I looked down at the bear trap, blood oozing from where the metal jaws were buried. I was frustrated at my foolishness. Of course, he had put traps in the woods. Why wouldn't he? I forced the jaws apart, the mechanism creaking, begging to bite down again. My hands shook, holding the slippery metal, and my leg was barely free. I let it snap shut. The sound of steel on steel clanked into the night, so loud it bounced off the trees. A second later, I heard an excited whooping noise. I'd heard him. He would be coming. I tried to see my ankle in the dark. There were nasty gashes on either side, but I didn't think it was broken. I got back up. It would hold weight. It was just hurting like hell. I didn't want to look back when I pushed forward, panic starting to set in, trying to regulate my breathing. I moved as quickly as I could, one strong step, one baby limp. I scanned the ground, looking for more traps. There had to be more, surely. Branches whipped my cheeks and pulled at my clothes. I tried to be more careful, but I just couldn't see them quick enough. My left foot squelched with every step, blood soaking through my sock into the laces. I pressed on, hurdling a large dead log. I had to find a spot to hide for a moment to catch my breath. My heart was racing. I was having trouble thinking rationally as I could with the situation. A wave of fear washed over me for the first time in a long time. I'd gotten what I wanted, a thrill to make me feel alive. But as I looked down at my mangled leg, I was starting to regret it. Gunfire cracked in the distance. Branches next to my ear exploded, specks of bark and dust hitting my face from the racing bullet. I threw myself to the ground and started crawling, dragging my injured ankle with me. I dragged myself to a large pine tree and sat behind it, trying to come up with a plan. The gun went off again, closer this time. The round punched into the tree, shaking loose needles that fell from above. I squinted in the dark, trying to see ahead. In front of me, the ground started to slope, and I could finally make out the sound of rushing water. It could be a creek or a small river. Keeping behind the large pine, I slowly stood, trying to stick to the shadows until I was ready. I pushed off and started to run for the slope, hearing the gunfire again. As soon as I was in view, a fierce pain ripped through my shoulder, and my arm went limp, but I wouldn't stop. I started down the hill. I could see the shimmering surface of the creek below, something bobbing in the water, rotted logs from the looks of it. I needed to get down there, get under the water, and use the logs as cover. I worked my way down the slope. The ground was wet, each step threatening to slide out from underneath me. I heard footsteps now, breaking sticks and brushing trees as they tried to catch up. Another gunshot. The bullet whizzed over my head and missed. I tried to go down further and crouched, but my feet were too unstable. I focused on the water, a little bit closer and closer, like it was my salvation. I was almost there. Behind me, I could hear the racking of the bolt-action rifle. I shot a panicked look behind me. I could barely see him working through the trees, 20 yards away. As I turned back to the creek, my good foot got caught on something. I fell forward, hit the ground hard, and started to roll painfully and awkwardly in the dark. I watched my descent in a swirl of moonlight and darkness, my elbows and knees colliding with the earth as I went. I came to a stop at the edge of the water, lying on my back, gasping for air. I barely moved, my vision spinning as I looked up at the sky. I could hear him coming down the hill slowly and carefully. He knew he had won. He was taking his time now. Exhausted and defeated, I looked at the creek. It wasn't logs I had seen floating. Bodies. Several of them, bloating and rotting in the clear glow of the moon. I looked around. The more I saw, men, women, children. Robert was there now, boots squishing as he looked down at me. A pair of black goggles were over his eyes, a wicked grin on his face. He unslung his rifle and let it fall to the ground, then pulled the goggles off his face and cast them aside like toys. Disappointing. Very disappointing. I thought with you being a park ranger and all, you'd make it further. But here we are, at the creek. They never make it past the creek. Robert cracked his knuckles and pulled the knife from his belt. He held the knife in both hands and brought it down, aiming for my heart. I put up my hands to fight him, but it only delayed the inevitable. He worked free from my grasp and elbowed me in the head. My vision blurred once more. My arms went slack as he buried the knife in my chest. My lung collapsed as the blade went in, and with a grunt, he pulled the blade down, separating my torso down the middle in a nasty gushing mess. Satisfied, he got up and left me there to die. I tried to talk, but it all came out as gurgled whispers. What was that?" he mocked, and he knelt to hear me. With the last of my breath, I spoke my final 2 words, just loud enough for him to hear. Involuntary screams came next, loud and shrill, broken vocal cords shouting in a mixture of barking and screeching. With both hands, I pulled the large incision, yanking the flesh apart in a spray of blood and disintegrating organs. His reaction was the same as all others before him, a look of pure irrational fear. My thin, inky black limbs burst from the gaping wound in my torso. I was on him in an instant, slashing the knife away and digging my nails into his flesh. I ripped his shirt like paper and separated his chest just like he did to me, my piercing screeches ringing into the night until I burrowed so deep they could no longer be heard. He thrashed and oozed from every orifice as he made room for me, just as the cab driver did, and the park ranger before him. I ate and wriggled as he expired, worming and digging my tiny frame to each limb like a suit. When the fit was just right, I stood up and cracked my knuckles. I looked at my reflection in the water, running a hand over my new face to feel the fit. Better than the last one, for sure. I took my time going back to the estate, making sure my walk was just right and everything was in place. The hours passed as I settled in, feeling more and more at home as I worked the joints and muscles. At daybreak, I emerged from the tree line to find Charles on the patio waiting. He came to greet me immediately. "Sir, this one had you out all night. Was this one better than the others? Can I get you something to drink?" "Oh, much better than the last," I replied. "A bourbon, if you will." I've been a fire lookout for about a year now. I spend most of my life alone in a small, window-lined, one-room shack atop a steel and wood-frame tower in the middle of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. My only companions are my collection of cheap novels, a laptop computer with infrequent and unreliable internet service, and the two-way radio I use to communicate with the few nearby towers and ranger stations. Nearby is a bit of a misnomer, though. Using my high-powered binoculars, I can just barely make out Tower 12 on a clear day, situated several miles to my west. Tower 15, the next nearest to my location, only appears as a glint of sunlight to my east when the sun catches it just right. I've been told the Parks Department intends to put up some additional towers in this area as soon as it gets the necessary funding, which is probably no time soon. That's fine with me, though. I like the solitude. It helps quiet my mind, keeps the memories at bay. Mostly, I occupy my days either with simple maintenance in and around the tower or scanning the dense trees all around me for any signs of trouble. It's been a dry year, so the threat of fire is a constant one. This particular afternoon, I was clearing some brush from around the base of the tower that had begun to encroach on the fire road leading back to the nearby ranger station 20 miles away. Even with the heavy suspension of the government-issued Jeep, the road was a harsh ride at the best of times. I had just finished dragging some brush cuttings off into the tree line when the radio clipped to my belt squawked. Tower 9. This is Tower 12. Do you copy? It was Billy Johnson, my supervisor. Nice enough guy, I suppose. Tended to leave me alone most of the time. I straightened up and stretched my back, wiping the sweat from my eyes with my forearm and keyed the microphone attached to my shoulder. Go for Tower 9, I replied as I replaced the shears and bow saw into the small storage shed near the base of the stairs. John, do you have eyes on a bit of smoke north of your position? Stand by, Billy, I said, snatching up my water bottle and jogging to the metal staircase that wound its way around the tower. I didn't bother locking the 8-foot chain-link fence surrounding my little compound. Chances were, I'd be back soon enough. Reaching the top, I stepped through the trapdoor and onto the walkway that circled the cabin, closing it behind me. It was habit at this point. The last thing I needed was to take an errant step and tumble down through the open hatch. I'd probably end up breaking my neck. As I passed by, I reached into the open door of the shack and grabbed the binoculars hanging on a nearby hook. Rounding the railed corner of the walkway and turning my attention to the dark green blanket of trees stretching out before me, I saw the smoke almost instantly. A thin trickle of wispy white haze rose lazily above the canopy some distance off. Probably just some campers, I figured, though there weren't any approved campsites in that area. We always had more than a few folks each season who decided that camping off-trail in the deep bush sounded like quite a hoot. Most of them come back just fine, oblivious to the danger that this wilderness presents to anyone not adequately prepared. Some of them have to be brought out by search and rescue. Some of them just don't come back. A ranger or a random hiker might occasionally come across the deserted remains of a campsite and report it in. Those are the spooky ones, the ones where people just vanished and left behind a perfectly set-up campsite. No explanation, no clues, just a deserted clearing, often with perfectly intact tents and personal effects. But there are bears and mountain lions, along with a handful of lesser predators that roam these forests, and sometimes they get hungry enough to stalk and even kill humans. And that doesn't even take into consideration the much more likely scenario. Folks stepping out of their tents at night to take a piss and very quickly getting lost. Most humans aren't suited to survival in the wilderness, unfortunately. My radio squawked again. Tower 9, what's the word? Yeah, I see it, Billy. Looks to be a couple of miles due north of my tower. What's your plan? He asked. I knew what he meant. Keep an eye on it and hope for the best, or take a trip over and investigate. After a brief pause, I sighed with resignation. It's probably just a campfire, but I guess I better head over and take a look to be sure. I didn't relish the thought of trekking to that area of wilderness, to be honest. It was the only area I hadn't explored during my time here. There weren't many trails heading in that direction, and the ones that did were badly overgrown and too narrow for the Jeep. A couple of miles hike might not seem like a lot, but when you're out here alone, the dense trees seem to stretch on forever. 2 miles can feel like 100. Roger that, John, Billy replied. Take your pack and your rifle. Check in periodically. Will do. Tower 9 out, I said, replacing the binoculars on their hook and shouldering the red canvas backpack waiting dutifully in the corner chair. I grabbed the rifle from its rack over the doorframe, checked to make sure it was loaded, and headed out. As I locked the gate behind me, I threw my pack in the back of the Jeep and set the rifle beside it. The Jeep wouldn't get me too far before the brush made the trail impassable, but if it saved me even half a mile of hiking, it was well worth it. The sun was still high in the sky. I had plenty of time to get there and back before dusk, as long as I didn't dawdle. I started the engine and turned the wheels toward the unmaintained trail to my right. After only a few moments, the trees and canopy obscured any trace of the watchtower behind me. I was actually able to push the Jeep farther than expected. A pleasant surprise. I was probably a mile along the trail before it bent, and a massive pine lay across the path, much too large to go over. The dense underbrush around me ruled out the possibility of going around. I immediately lamented not bringing the chainsaw. Cutting it up and winching the pieces out of the way wouldn't have been too difficult and would have saved me a ton of trouble. With a quiet curse, I stepped out of the Jeep and grabbed my gear from the back seat. I smiled to myself as a quote from a certain fictional adventure-seeking archaeologist suddenly came to mind. "We walk from here." Making sure to mark the location of the Jeep on my handheld GPS, I stepped over the thigh-high tree trunk and continued along the path. According to my earlier estimate, the trail was heading in the direction of the smoke, which was a blessing in my book. The less time I had to spend bushwhacking, the better. The trail continued to narrow, as I expected, and before long, I was brushing branches and leaves with my shoulders as I walked. The trees, which had been alive with the cheering and chirping of animal life near the tower, now seemed muted. The forest around me was growing denser, feeling oddly claustrophobic at times. Billy checked in a few times, and I updated him on my progress, promising to maintain regular contact. He advised me that a weather relay from the ranger station had reported an approaching storm, likely to reach us before nightfall. A quick glance at my watch made me wince. I had already spent more time than I'd predicted. Maybe it was best to turn around and head back. The last thing I wanted was to get caught out here overnight with minimal supplies and a rainstorm. I wasn't worried, but it sure wouldn't be comfortable. If I'd been farther from my destination, I probably would have turned back right then. I wish I had. Within another 20 minutes, however, I smelled the faint scent of a wood fire. Not strong, but definitely there. I was even more certain of what I'd find when I reached them. When I stepped out of the now almost non-existent trail, I found myself in a sparsely treed area amidst a dozen or so wooden shacks, and I halted in surprise. I had reached the base of a hilly rise covered in heavy forest, and these old, forgotten cabins looked like they had belonged to some sort of small settlement. Perhaps an old logging camp, I thought. I didn't know this place even existed, and made a mental note to research it when I got back to my tower. I keyed the microphone. "Tower 12, this is John. Do you copy?" Billy replied, his voice staticky and distant. "Hey, John, Tower 12, what's your status?" I frowned and looked around at the towering trees all around me. I suppose I was asking more out of the portable radio than was reasonable. I was lucky I still had any signal at all. "I found what looks like an old logging or trapping camp," I said, meandering among the decaying and derelict cabins. Most had collapsed roofs and were barely standing. "The campfire has to be nearby. I'm going to take a look around a bit more." There was a pause before Billy spoke again. "What's your current location, John?" I glanced at my handheld GPS and relayed my position. Another pause. "John, I think you should probably just turn back. Come back, okay? You don't have many more hours of daylight left, and that storm looks like it's getting worse." Something in his voice sounded off, but I couldn't quite place it. Nervous, maybe? I couldn't blame him. My safety was his responsibility, and the idea of one of his lookouts being caught out in a storm overnight probably didn't sit well. Coincidentally, it didn't sit well with me either. "You may be right, Billy," I replied, turning around and casting my eyes over the area. "I'll just head—" I stopped as my eyes caught sight of a bright yellow nylon tent just beyond the last of the structures. "Repeat your last, John." "I didn't get that." "Stand by." "Tower 12, I said absently, making my way toward what I now realized was a small cluster of 3 modern tents situated around a central fire ring. The fire had been completely extinguished, but the embers still smoldered lowly, the source of the smoke. I looked around for the campers. Nothing. No one in sight or earshot. Sleeping bags and electric lanterns were still inside the tents, though I couldn't find any backpacks or supplies. "Hello?" I called out, turning in a circle. "I'm with the Forest Service. Is anyone here?" Nothing, just the muted echo of my own voice. I was about to dump some dirt on the remaining embers of the campfire and call it a day when I noticed the narrow footpath leading toward the slope. In the soft dirt were clearly recent footprints heading away from the camp. I keyed the mic again. "Tower 12, this is John. I found the source of the smoke. It's a campfire, all right?" "Nothing to be concerned about," Billy answered almost immediately. "Roger that, John. Head back home." I paused a moment, curiosity pulling me toward the footpath. "I'll be heading back shortly, Billy. Just want to check something out first." "I wouldn't screw around out there, John," Billy replied, an edge to his voice. "Better head back now so you can beat the storm." His last sentence didn't exactly sound like a suggestion. Something had him rattled. I hesitated before answering. "Acknowledged," I said, knowing full well I was going to check out the path before heading back. Still, I didn't feel like arguing with my supervisor over something so small. Just a quick walk up that path, then I'd be on my way. This path was even less established than the one I'd been on earlier, but I could clearly see the campers' imprints in the dirt as I went. Before long, I emerged into a small clearing, eyes widening with yet another unexpected discovery. The rough-hewn timber that framed the entryway was set into the near vertical slope of the hillside before me. It created a dark tunnel entrance that had clearly been sealed off with a heavy iron gate many years ago, likely by the Park Service to keep inquisitive hikers from falling to their deaths in an old, abandoned mine shaft. So it had been a mining camp, not a logging one. I didn't know there were any mines near here. Hell, I wasn't even sure what they could have been mining for. Coal? Maybe gold? Did they even have gold mines in Tennessee? Who knows? Certainly not me. Clearly, regardless, now that gate stood wide on its hinges, the remains of a rusted chain and antique padlock lying in the dirt nearby. Hell, I couldn't just turn around and leave. One of these dumbass campers had decided it'd be fun to explore a closed and restricted mine entrance. This is Tower 12. This is John D. Reed. Billy probably wouldn't be happy that I'd continued my exploration after he told me to head back, but there was nothing to do about it now. I wasn't equipped or trained for any sort of cave exploration or rescue. The Rangers had very specialized teams for that sort of thing. But I could at least poke my head inside and see if there were any campers, or hear them, confirm if they went inside. No answer from the radio. I tried again, with the same results. I tried a different approach. "Tower 15, this is John from Tower 12. Do you copy?" I said into the radio. I figured I might be able to at least get Nathan's attention if I was out of range of Billy. "Tower 12. There was a burst of static that sounded like it might have contained the hint of a human voice, but it was too distorted and distant to make anything out. There was only a moment of indecision before I made up my mind. I knew it was reckless going into the mine, especially when my supervisor believed I was currently on my way back to the tower. But I had this nagging intuition that something might be wrong with the whole situation. Maybe someone was hurt and needed help. I couldn't just leave them there, knowing that I might be their only chance of rescue. In retrospect, I should have turned back and called it in to the ranger station. They could have mobilized the search and rescue teams that specialized in cave rescues. I should have. But I didn't. I pulled my powerful LED flashlight from my pack, turned it on, and headed into the pitch-black darkness of the mine entrance. The walls and floor had been smoothly carved many years ago, which made my footing uneventful, and the tunnel itself was mostly a straight shot. Several times during the first few minutes, I turned back to watch the bright square of daylight at the entrance gradually shrink to a pinpoint of light. By the time I'd taken the first dogleg turn of the tunnel, I was in complete darkness. It was a very strange feeling, oppressive almost. At one point, I turned off my flashlight experimentally, but after only a few seconds, I quickly flicked it back on. In that short time, My heart had been pounding in my chest, and some primal fear had begun growing inside me. It took a moment to calm myself. The darkness was absolute. It was almost as if you could feel it pressing in on you. My footsteps seemed much louder than they should have on the dirt floor, and the air was growing cold and damp the further I went. After another 100 feet or so, the smoothly carved tunnel ended abruptly in a wall of rubble. I couldn't tell if it was a cave-in at some point, or if this was simply where the miners stopped digging and hadn't bothered to remove the debris. But either way, it certainly appeared to be the end of the line. And then I saw it. I almost missed it because of the way the light and shadows played over the head-sized rocks strewn before me. But when I looked closer, I realized I was looking at a ragged hole in the wall. It was only 5 feet across or so, and definitely didn't look like the deliberate formation of the tunnel I was standing in now. It almost looked like the miners had broken into a natural void of some sort. Interesting. But there was no way in hell I was going in there. I was definitely not trained or outfitted for any sort of spelunking trip, and it didn't seem the sort of thing suited to the learn-as-you-go method. Just as I was turning back to make my way out of the mine, I heard the distant sound of voices echoing from the opening in the stone wall. The sound was faint, and may have just been my imagination, but I didn't think so. "Hello?" I called, pressing my face into the black abyss of the hole. "Can you hear me? I'm with the Park Service. I'm here to help you." Nothing. The air from beyond the breach was cold and smelled stale. Old. Wrong. It felt as if I didn't belong here. None of us did. There was a long moment of unbroken silence, and then I heard a voice again. Closer this time. "Did you hear that?" it said, presumably to a companion. It sounded like a young woman, nervous, uncertain. "Hello? Someone there?" That settled it for me. I carefully crawled through the opening into the space beyond. Shining my light around, I found myself in a small natural chamber, maybe 30 feet across, with an uneven ceiling of jagged rock that barely cleared my head. The first thing that caught my attention was the cracked lantern lying on the ground. It looked old. Very old. Maybe 100 years or more. A thick layer of grime and age covered its soot-blackened surface, and the glass was thick and uneven. Beside the askew lantern was a small leather-bound book, partially buried in the dirt and dust, with a moldering leather strap securing it closed. It looked like a journal. And without a thought, I tucked it into my backpack. Raising my light back up, scanning around the room. "Hello?" I called again. I didn't hear the voices anymore, but the narrow beam of my flashlight illuminated another tunnel in the far corner of this room, mired in darkness. "Can you hear me?" Once again, I got that feeling that something wasn't right. Then the voice came again. Closer this time. "Did you hear that? Hello? Is someone in here?" she asked, her voice trembling with apprehension. I hesitated, frowning. Something didn't seem right about the voice, but I couldn't put my finger on it. Before I could summon my words to respond, another voice called out. This time, it was clear. The voice of a young man. "We can hear you moving around in there. Please help us. We're lost, and our friend is hurt." "Hear me moving around in there?" I was shouting to them. I sure as hell wasn't trying to hide. Could they not hear me for some reason? I stepped forward to the secondary tunnel and raised my voice again. "I'm with the Forest Service." It was then, when I reached out to steady myself against the wall of the tunnel entrance, that my hand met something wet, and I recoiled in disgust, thinking I had just grabbed a handful of some subterranean slime. When I shone my light on it, however, it became very clear the reality was far worse. Blood. I stepped back, trying to keep the panic that was fighting to take control of my rationality at bay. I needed to keep a level head, for now. Panning my light around, I saw an astonishing amount of blood painting the wall and floor in front of me. Somebody had definitely been hurt, and badly. With blood loss like this, I wasn't sure I'd be able to stabilize them long enough to get rescue in here. What the hell happened here? And why did the hikers continue into the cave after one of them was injured this badly? Unless they lost their light and got turned around, there was no way for them to get lost. There hadn't been any branches to this tunnel since I first entered. All they had to do was turn around and walk until they saw daylight. The man's voice called again, colored with the unmistakable tinge of fear. "What the hell is that? Hurry up, Becky. Take my hand." He seemed to be getting closer. At least if I could guide them to my voice, maybe I could get them out of here. Get to higher ground. Radio for rescue evac. They had a helicopter permanently stationed at the main ranger station. It could be here in 20 minutes if I was able to reach them. The woman's voice came again, and this time I froze. "Did you hear that? Hello? Is someone in here?" All at once, it hit me. The indescribable unease I had been mostly successful in repressing now fought back with renewed vigor. I realized in that moment what I had missed previously. The woman had repeated herself, twice now. No change in her inflection, no variation in emotion or urgency. It was exactly the same, down to the syllable. It was like I was listening to a recording. "Did you hear that? Hello? Is someone in here?" repeated the male voice, now even closer. "Hurry up, Becky. Take my hand." Below the words, I could hear the stealthy sliding of something over rocks. It seemed like it wasn't too far beyond the tunnel entrance now, but I wasn't going to wait for it to emerge from the darkness. I didn't think that what I'd see emerge from the darkness would be a couple of college kids who'd had a rough time of it during a weekend camping trip. Allowing my panic to run free, I turned and threw myself through the cave breach and landed roughly on the flat stone floor of the mine shaft. Beyond skinning my hands to hell and banging my knee on a rock, scrambling my feet with a hiss of pain, I ran as fast as I could, not realizing until I finally burst into the waning light of the late afternoon that I had lost my rifle somewhere in that cave. It was darker than it was when I first entered the mine, and a quick glance to the sky showed the angry black thunderheads that had moved in, as promised, much faster than I had expected. I quickly swung the iron gate closed on screeching hinges and looped the chain between the bars as tightly as I could, securing it rather lamely with the hasp of a broken padlock. I stood there for a long moment, bent over with my hands on my knees, trying to catch my breath outside the mine entrance when I felt the first drops of the coming storm on the back of my neck. I straightened and looked through the bars of the gate into the ominous darkness beyond, realizing how ridiculous my barricade really was. It wouldn't do much good if something tried to get out, but at least it made me feel a little bit better. At least it made me feel a little bit better until I heard the voice echoing from the mine shaft. Peh, getting closer. It was unmistakable. Uncanny. "Hello, can you hear me? I'm with the Park Service. I'm here to help you." By the time dawn arrived the next morning, I had climbed down from my temporary shelter in the low boughs of the red cedar and tried to work out all the painful kinks from my stiff shoulders and neck. The night had not been kind to me, but I was alive, which is more than my fiercest mind expected after yesterday. The night had been harrowing. There was no better word to describe it. The rain hissed among the trees and stung exposed skin angrily, driven by the banshee wail of the wind rushing through the forest, accentuated by the chaotic flashing of lightning and the heart-stopping crack of thunder. Because of this relentless chaos, it's difficult to say with any certainty. But throughout the night, I thought I heard something large trying to move stealthily in the forest near my shelter. I say, trying, because it felt like whatever stalked through the underbrush was more at home in the unnatural, Stygian gloom of a cave than under the watchful eyes of nature. Of course, it could just as easily have been my imagination. In the first dim light of dawn, as it started to illuminate the sodden and dripping forest, I spent the better part of 20 minutes straining my eyes with every ounce of concentration as I scanned the gray woodlands around me. I was only 10 feet or so above the ground, but there was no way I was going to step foot from my hide until I was absolutely certain that I was alone. Once I was satisfied I was alone for the moment, I climbed down to the muddy ground. I tried the radio several times through the night and into the morning, but wasn't able to get even a burst of static that might indicate someone trying to respond. A combination of the storm and interference from the trees worked against me. My first thought was to get back to my Jeep as quickly as possible and run every drop of gas out of its tank, trying to get as far away from this place as I could. When I checked the GPS to see how close I was to its marked position, however, I found the unit unresponsive, with a disastrous crack across the screen that seemed to mock my dismay, probably caused by my less than graceful scramble from that damned cave. A rifle? No radio? No GPS. Perfect. I still had a compass and the rising sun to guide me, though, and that was something. I was only a couple miles from my tower, which should have been somewhere due south of where I stood. I knew that once I got close, I should be able to either find the service road or the tower itself, so there wasn't much danger of getting myself lost, at least. It was a small comfort, but one I gladly took. I moved through the trees and undergrowth with more speed and recklessness than I probably should have. An ankle broken by an errant misstep would have been bad news. Still, even though I hadn't heard or seen anything of my late-night visitor, I couldn't help but feel I was being watched. Do you know that creeping sense of dread you feel when you've just turned off the lights in the basement and now have to climb the stairs back to the light of the doorway? Or when you're making your way from your car in a dark and lonely parking lot? The feeling that something is there, something much more suited to the dark than you are? It's that same feeling that pushed my footsteps almost to a jog as I traversed the uneven ground and storm-felled trees that tried to hinder my passage. For the next hour, I moved at this pace, aware of every rasping lungful of breath, knowing that I should pause and rest for a few minutes, as pushing myself to fatigue would only increase my chances of falling or hurting myself. I imagined myself lying in blinding pain next to an unseen chuck hole, clutching at a broken leg and watching as the sunlight began to dim with the onset of dusk, waiting for whatever hunted my trail to find me. What would happen? Would I even have time to look on its visage before it struck? Did those campers in the cave? A misstep and a stumble that nearly made this nightmare a self-fulfilled prophecy jarred me back to the present. Against all instinct, I forced my pace to slow, first to a trot, then to a walk, and then reluctantly, I stopped completely, trying to catch my breath while I scanned the dense woodland around me. Nothing. No. Not nothing. As my heart began to slow and my breathing returned to a more manageable cadence, I turned my gaze back in the direction I had been headed, and an unconscious smile found its way to my lips. The sun had risen high in the morning sky during my flight, and now I caught a flash of its reflection on the windows of my tower, not 200 yards directly ahead of me. I laughed aloud with relief, fully aware that this fear-tinted eruption was closer to the manic cackle of lunacy than anything else. I didn't care, though. My feet started forward on their own, quickly reaching a brisk pace. A few minutes later, I burst out of the trees into the maintained clearing surrounding my tower, feeling the full sunlight on my face for the first time since yesterday. Had it only been a day? It seemed like longer. I was so filled with relief that I didn't even register the fact that the forestry department Jeep sat parked near my fenced-in tower until I started entering the combination into the gate lock. The faded white 12 emblazoned on the corner of the windshield told me that it was Billy's Jeep, which wasn't much of a surprise. I realized after a moment, after not hearing back from him, that I was more surprised I hadn't returned to find an entire search and rescue team making preparations to search for their lost puppy. I punched the 4-digit code into the mechanical combination lock on the gate and stepped through, making sure to close and lock it behind me. I stood there for a moment, staring through the tall chain-link fence at the dense tree line, wondering if something waited just out of sight in the shadows, staring back at me with hungry anticipation. I shook off the sudden chill as best as I could and made my way quickly to the staircase, taking the steps 2 at a time. Billy was going to be pissed at me, I was sure, but that thought was a fleeting one that didn't take purchase. His displeasure was the least of my concerns right now. When I reached the top, I threw open the trapdoor and suddenly found myself looking down the muzzle of a very large rifle. Even in that brief moment of abrupt shock, I could register how the barrel trembled in the hands of its agitated master, and I wondered how close I came to having my life ended in a brief flash of light. The moment only lasted a second or two, and then Billy hastily swung the rifle away in a safe direction. "Damn it, John," he exclaimed, his tone an incongruous mixture of relief and fear. "I almost shot you." I stepped fully through the trap door and let it close behind me. "Jesus, Billy," I breathed, leaning back against the railing. I suddenly felt weary and realized it was likely the adrenaline now rushing through my system that had kept me moving at such a hurried pace throughout the morning. "Where the hell have you been?" he demanded, stepping back inside my shack and taking a chair at the small table in the center of the room. I noted with mild interest that he kept the rifle leaning against the table beside him instead of stowing it in the rack over the door, but decided not to comment on it. Billy Johnson was in his middle years, maybe 45 or so, with a bit of a gut and grayish-brown hair, trimmed clothes. He wore an impressive mustache that reminded me of something an Old West gunslinger might sport. He was dressed in typical attire, khaki Forest Service shirt and brown cargo pants. In addition to the rifle, I had had the unfortunate opportunity to closely examine a moment earlier. I noticed that he wore his .500 Magnum in a holster at his side. That wasn't too unusual. When in the bush, bears and mountain lions can sneak up on you unawares. Having a hand cannon within easy reach goes a long way toward taking the fight out of them if necessary. It was a little unusual for a drive over to another tower, I suppose, but not exceptionally so, given the circumstances. I took the opposite chair, dropping my pack to the floor next to me. I realized my legs were still shaking anxiously and placed my hands on my knees to try to calm them. He was trying to deflect, but he was horrendously bad at it. He knew something. I was sure of it. "You know where I've been," I replied, gambling on instinct. I watched his face closely for a reaction and wasn't disappointed when he winced and turned his focus out the window and over the forest to the north. "I told you to abort and head back to your tower," he stated brusquely. "But you just had to feed that curiosity of yours, didn't you? You're damn lucky to be alive, you know that?" From my chair, I reached under the cupboard to my right and pulled a half-empty bottle of Jameson and a couple of mostly clean glasses. Billy turned his head and raised an inquisitive eyebrow. Alcohol was a no-no up here, but when I poured and handed him one of the glasses, he accepted it without a word. I took a pull from the other. "It's my own damn fault, I suppose," he continued, turning back fully to me. "It's been so long since anyone's even thought of Camp LeClaire that it didn't even click for me when you told me where you saw the campfire." I took another drink and then poured a bit more of the whiskey. "Camp LeClaire," I repeated. "That old mining camp?" "Logging camp, actually," he corrected me. "The mine was there long before the East Atlantic Logging Company set up out there. Nobody knows who dug it. Hell, nobody even knows when it was dug, a long time before the 19th century at least. Camp LeClaire was established in 1872, and the mine was old even before that." He looked at me in earnest for the first time since I'd returned and frowned. "You look like hell, John. Got caught in the storm, I'm guessing." "Hell of a storm." I only raised my eyebrows as if to say, "What an understatement." Billy nodded knowingly and took another swallow. "Did you find the campers at least?" I shook my head and turned to look out the window to the north, where I could almost envision the black void of that mine entrance staring back at me. "No," I said softly. "I tracked them to the mine but lost them in the cave." I jumped when Billy's glass hit the floor and he was out of his chair before I even realized it. Billy hadn't moved from his seat, but now both hands were splayed on the table before him as if to steady himself. His pale blue eyes were wide and fixed on me. "You went into the cave?" he said, a sudden and horrifying realization dawning on him. It was then I realized my mistake. He hadn't known. He thought I had just discovered the camp and the mine, and then got caught in the storm overnight. A close call, but nothing that couldn't be undone. Yeah, I replied, nodding slowly, deliberately. Yeah, I went into that cave looking for the campers. The gate had been cracked open already. I'm not sure by whom or when. I leaned forward in my chair and stared hard at him. Billy, there's something in there. I think it got those campers. I think it followed me out. Billy Johnson's face had gone white then, and I thought for a moment he might pass out. He scooped his glass up from the floor with numb fingers and poured himself another splash of whiskey, downing it in one gulp. When he spoke again, it sounded far away and distant. Utami, he muttered. That's what the Chickasaw called it, and they were here long before we ever were. Blur is what the white man called it, among other names, Kuatami. He nodded. False brother, lying man, something like that. Hell, I don't know. What do I look like, a translator? It means bad, he continued. No matter what language you speak, it means something's out there that isn't supposed to be, something that was locked away a long time ago and forgotten. It was then that he stood and grabbed his rifle, as if suddenly remembering something. I need to get back to my tower and make a call now. I gestured to the radio base station sitting patiently on the table near the door. Why not use mine? Billy shook his head. Sorry, John. It doesn't work that way. Special phone, special number. I just hope I'm not too late. I started to stand. I'll go with you, I said. He pointed a stern finger at me and narrowed his eyes. No, you stay here, strap on your handgun, and make sure it's loaded. His voice was calm, almost cold, and didn't leave much room for debate. Still, I had no desire to stay alone with whatever this angler thing was roaming around out here. Billy, I can go with you. I can help. I started to argue, but it was quickly cut off when he took a menacing step toward me. And I realized quickly how much I'd underestimated him because of his normally easy manner. You will stay in your goddamn tower, and you will follow orders, he roared. I took an unconscious step back and reclaimed my seat, only managing a shaking nod in agreement. He took a trembling breath, pointed at the radio, and said in a slightly less terrifying tone, "And keep that thing on. As soon as I'm back at my tower, I'll radio you with updates." A moment later, he was gone, and the trapdoor slammed shut behind him. I stood and retrieved the Pelican case from under my cot. Inside was the same model of .500 Magnum revolver that Billy had been wearing, heavy and cold in my hands. I loaded it and belted it on the leather holster, feeling the reassuring weight tugging at my waist. "John?" I heard Billy call from below. I went outside to the walkway, leaning over the railing. He was standing beside his Jeep, 50 feet below, shielding his eyes from the bright sunlight as he looked up at me. "Make sure to keep everything locked. I'll come back for you," he shouted. I raised a hand to him and slid the latch shut on the trapdoor with my toe. I turned back into my shack as I heard Billy's Jeep fire up, and a moment later, it drove off down the rough service road toward his tower. I glanced back to the north, to the place where I had first seen the campfire smoke rising the day before, and suppressed a shudder. I was alone again, safe in my tower and armed, but alone. Abruptly, like an unexpected wave of nausea, the feeling that I was being watched washed over me with a chill, making the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I looked back over my shoulder to where Billy had been only a minute before, but saw only the rough service road and dense, impenetrable tree line beyond. That's probably just my imagination, but the feeling didn't diminish, and with every passing breath, I was more and more certain that there was something nearby, just out of sight, standing stone still in the gray-green foliage, waiting. I stood there a long moment, eyes straining for any hint of movement or alien shape among the shadows. But if there was, my human eyes weren't sharp enough to pick it out. I stepped back through the open doorway of my shack and dropped down into the chair again, my eyes catching the bottle of whiskey before me. I was tempted to pour another drink to help settle my nerves, but I could already feel the tickle of a buzz at the edges of my mind from what I'd already drunk, and quickly decided that was the last thing I needed for my reflexes and awareness to be dulled right now. I'd made more than one poor decision in the last 24 hours. and I didn't think adding another to the pile was such a great idea. Grabbing the bottle, I screwed the cap back on and reached to return it to the sparse cover to my right. As I did so, my boot caught my pack, knocking it over. Without a thought, I reached down to move it out of the way, and then remembered the old weather journal tucked inside the front pocket, the one I'd found in the cave. I reached into the unzipped front pocket. For a frustratingly alarming moment, my searching hand couldn't feel anything in the compartment, and I feared that I'd lost it in my chaotic escape. But then my fingers brushed the familiar shape, and I withdrew it, setting it in front of me on the table. I could see the book much more clearly now in the daylight. It wasn't overly large. A little larger than my hand, and maybe the thickness of my thumb. There were no markings on the front except for a simple, grimy brass loop that secured the leather strap holding it closed. I wasn't sure I wanted to see what was inside, but I needed some answers. Anything. A stray sound from the trees below rose to my ears, and I froze, listening intently for more, but none came. The forest around me was silent again, and I turned my attention back to the journal, pulling the strap free from the cover and turning to the front page. From the pocket of Andrew Robinson, it said. The writing was neat and compact and distinctly male. The ink was a rich black, scrawled upon brittle yellow pages, and though faded with the years, was still mostly legible. I turned to the next page, where the entries began. I felt as though I had dropped into his account midway, as though this was just the latest in a series of journals that Andrew Robinson had been keeping. 23rd July, 1891. After nearly a week of hard overland trekking, we reached the abandoned camp late this afternoon, exactly where the old trapper said we would. Sequoia Arpani, tracker, has once again astonished me with his overland navigation skills. I must admit I was skeptical at the yar in the old tavern, spun the crowded confines of the common house in Dun Creek, especially after I smelled the liquor on his breath. But the professor never gathered a moment. The man's instincts for reading human character are absolutely singular. The camp looks to have been abandoned, and I have to admit a certain unease as we inspected the rough cabins. There isn't a soul to be found, and it looks years abandoned, yet everything stands as if awaiting the loggers' return at any moment. Strange. 24th July, 1891. Our small troop, both intrepid adventurers, made camp in the center of LeClaire last night. Those cabins likely would have been more comfortable, but I doubt any of us would have felt at ease intruding upon them. Richards laughed it off when someone mentioned how peculiar it was that the loggers had departed in such a hurry that they abandoned their personal possessions. But I could see in his eyes that he felt it odd as well. Sequoia, our ever-courageous and solid guide, seemed ill at ease and unusually withdrawn, refusing all conversation and only responding in queries with quiet grunts. Something of concern hides behind his eyes, though, and I wonder what it is. Only the professor seems unmoved by the unusually still atmosphere of this place, and his typical infectious positivity keeps working at our unease, keeping it from expanding beyond its current state. Today, we spent much of the day exploring the area surrounding Camp LeClaire, and the sunlight was nearly spent when Dobson burst back into camp with news of his discovery. We all of us raced at a moment's notice behind him as he led us along an ill-used and nearly invisible footpath that led ever ascending upon the side of the northern rocky slope. When the path terminated, we were deposited before a truly curious sight, a barricaded tunnel entrance that had been bored into the rock face by some unknown hands. I suspect some sort of exploration tunnel or added dug-in search of precious ores, especially given the nation's more recent history with gold fever. The wooden barrier that had been roughly assembled from a hodgepodge of heavy timber beams was curious, and several of our group commented on it. But the professor dismissed the triviality, so the matter was dropped. It is far too late in the day to proceed any further, but we plan to penetrate the barricade and enter the tunnel in the morning. The excitement among the men is palpable. 25th July 1891. Sequoia is gone. He took his supplies and his prized Winchester rifle and fled sometime during the night like a phantom. This is a shocking blow to all of us, foreign to the professor, with whom the Pawnee Tracker had partnered for a number of years across much of the eastern states. We have no explanation for his sudden desertion, and it sits unwell with the entirety of the group. The overall mood has darkened, I fear. Still, we must push onward. 25th July 1891 addendum. It took more than 2 hours of hard labor, but we were finally able to gain entrance to the mine shortly before noon today. Richards managed to get his boot caught between two heavy timbers as he stumbled forward, straining his ankle with a terrible cry. We feared it broken, but Dr. Franklin assured us that his bones seemed intact. Regardless, Richards was taken back to the camp, where he will convalesce while the rest of us make our entry. His part in our exploration has come to an end for now. We made our way in a single file through the added tunnel for some way before reaching its carved end. The light from our oil lanterns providing regrettably inadequate illumination over the rocky surroundings. When we reached the terminus of the mine tunnel, our hearts sank for a moment before the professor gave an exclamation of discovery and suddenly disappeared through a nearly hidden rift in the wall, surrounded by jagged rocks. We eagerly followed him through, careful of our footing as we went, and found ourselves in what I can only assume to be an accidental breach by the miners into a natural cave system. The air was chill and unmoving, but our excitement over this discovery laid any concerns or discomfort this may have caused. The professor directed us to set up a secondary camp in this new chamber, which we'll use as a staging point for further exploration. So, we spent the rest of the day bringing supplies for our main camp and constructing a smaller version in this moderately sized chamber. By the time we completed this endeavor, the efforts of the day precluded the start of the exploration until the group has had the opportunity to rest and replenish their energy. I feel I will sleep well tonight despite the anxious excitement buzzing around my mind. 26th July, 1891. Another shock. When we woke this morning, O'Connor is gone. The Irishman, who has ever been reliable and constant as the North Star, was assigned first watch last night. There is no trace of him, and no indication that he took any provisions or even his personal rucksack with him. I fear his natural inquisitiveness may have gotten the best of him and led him to explore the deeper caverns beyond our ad hoc base camp, for his lantern is the sole item that has gone missing with his person. The professor immediately rallied the rest of our small group, 7 in all now, and mounted a search for our lost companion. I tried to caution him against rushing into action, but he was not to be deterred. To my dismay, I was the sole man ordered to remain here at camp, whilst my companions took up their supplies and launched deeper into the cave system in the event young O'Connor returned in their absence. I was understandably disappointed, but grasped the logic of it well enough. I would loathe to think of O'Connor returning only to find us all gone, and then losing himself again, trying to find us. I shall endeavor to rest a bit. With luck, my companions will return before long with our lost compatriot. 27th July 1891. I am at my wit's end, and I'm unsure how to proceed. It has been more than a day since the professor led the rest of the men in search of poor O'Connor, and I have felt their absence as keenly as I am aware of my own solitude in this cave. I've seen nothing of our missing companion or the party that delved deeper into the system yesterday morning, and I know their lanterns did not have sufficient fuel to carry them for this long without other means of illumination to guide their return. I fear they are hopelessly lost. I myself had to return to LeClaire for more lantern oil for my waning light. I must admit, with no little embarrassment and some reluctance, to my return to this dark place, which no longer carries any of its former adventurous excitement or fascination. It is now nothing more than a doorway into the deep places below the earth, where men were never intended to tread. But the growing apprehension is not the worst of it. The sounds, by heaven's grace, the sounds. I first became aware of them last night as I did my lantern and tried to set myself to sleep. At first, it was only an indistinct and muted echo, which may have been interpreted as nothing more than the distant whistle of wind or other natural sound distorted by the unique acoustics of this place. Then I heard the distinct tonal qualities that could only be a man's voice. I instantly rose and took my lantern, raising the flame and rushing to the entrance of the cave that swallowed my companions. There I stood, listening with such keen focus that I felt beads of sweat upon my brow. I would swear upon a holy book that it was the distant call of the professor himself, and I eagerly called back with as much fervor as I could summon, hoping desperately to guide them back to me. However, the instant I called out, the voices vanished, and I was met only with the suffocating silence of an open tomb. There I stood, straight as a sentinel, praying for a response from my friends. After several minutes of absolute silence, my thoughts began turning to dark things. I became painfully aware that anything beyond the weak cast of my lantern would be utterly invisible to me. But I, on the other hand, would be lighted as a beacon to it. I pushed these thoughts from my mind as forcefully as I could, inwardly chastising myself for seeing ghouls where none existed. I was about to call out again to my lost companions when I heard it. The voice came again, echoing from the claustrophobic abyss that lay before me, mired in the blackest darkness one could imagine. It was still some distance away, I estimated, but I was certain it seemed closer now. When the third time I heard it, I was just barely able to make out the words, but it was enough to be sure. My own words echoed back at me from the depths of that damned cave, and in my own voice, I staggered and nearly dropped the lantern. At that moment, could the legends be true? The professor always seemed to believe them, though I must admit I attributed his faith to the unwavering certainty he held in those things lost to antiquity. He'd always maintained that a legend, especially one whispered by so many indigenous people without mutual contact, must have some root in truth. But that line of reasoning is antithetical to modern civility, and I must reject it and focus on the more probable explanation that my already stressed nerves were turning my fears against me. The voices must be those of my companions, lost in the dark, but near enough to hear their calls. They must be. I'm not certain what lies next, but I know that I cannot abandon my companions, my friends, to wander the darkness until they fall from exhaustion or dehydration. Not while I might yet help them. I will leave this written account at the entrance to the cave. This lantern is nearly spent, but I have another with a full vessel that'll take its stead. If I do not return, at least someone may know of our passing here. May God be with us all. I closed the journal with a trembling hand, momentarily lost in what I just read. How is it possible? The journal was more than 130 years old. No animal alive then could be what pursued me now. What if it's not an animal? The sudden burst of static from Billy's call that simultaneously erupted from my radio base station and the portable handset clipped to my shoulder made me jump and drop the journal to the floor, heart pounding. I cursed under my breath and keyed the microphone. "Go for Tower 9, I answered, my voice tight as I spoke. My eyes drifted out across the sky to the east, where darkening thunderheads had been unknowingly gathering and marching slowly in my direction. I shook my head. Icing on the cake, I thought. "John, what's your position?" asked Billy, the self-assured authority that filled his tone now strangely absent, replaced with something else, fear. I frowned a moment at the question before answering. "What do you think, Billy? I'm in my tower, just like you told me." A strange pause before he spoke again. "John, this isn't some sort of joke, right? You're not outside my tower?" I was growing more agitated by the moment. What sort of question was that? I had no Jeep. There was no way I could have made it to his tower in such a short amount of time, even if I'd wanted to. "No, Billy," I answered with more force than I intended. "I'm not outside your tower." I stopped mid-sentence, a horrified realization sweeping over me. In that moment, I tried to speak, but my mouth had gone dry. "Billy," it was all I could muster. The radio was silent as my eyes slowly drifted to the west, where I could just make out the small, lonely shape of Tower 12. Barely visible over the darkening blanket of green, was that a gunshot? Another night, another goddamn night stuck in this window-lined prism. At least I have a good view, so I guess that's something. The storm raged all night again last night, and only let up just before dawn. At one point, the winds were gusting hard enough to rock the tower, which was a bit disconcerting to say the least. As I stand out on the wet catwalk around my shack, I see that the clouds haven't let us go just yet, and look every bit as pissed off as they did yesterday afternoon. It seems like the last dry season has come to an end, which is good since I've been slacking a bit on my fire-watching duties over the last couple of days. Gallows humor, right? Due to that, or I'm sitting in the corner in a fetal position crying. I've been told by my ex-fiancée that I'm not an attractive crier. I haven't heard Pete from Billy since his last terrifying broadcast to me yesterday. I tried to reach him several times since then, but no dice. I've also tried reaching Nathan and the ranger station, but all I get is static, even from my base radio set. When I first started here, I remember Billy telling me during my brief orientation that the radio should be able to reach out 50 miles or more, so I'm not sure what's going on with them. Update: I just took a quick look at the base station and found that the cable leading up to the antenna on the roof of the shack is now just a dangly thing swaying in the breeze. The storm must have decided it needed the antenna more than I did because it's gone. I can see where the screws were torn out of the wooden mast, and before you say anything about whatever this thing is that's been stalking around and deciding to sabotage my radio, I should probably tell you that the wooden antenna mast looks like it's been around for a long time. The wood was probably dry rotted to begin with, and now that it's soaked, it's crumbled away into little wet brown bits as soon as I probed it with my fingers. Speaking of whatever this Kwatami or angler thing is, and I'm just going to call it a mimic, I think I haven't heard anything weird since yesterday. I'm assuming it's still over there somewhere, but I don't think it's nearby. If it's still anywhere around here, it's probably somewhere over near Tower 12, or at least that's what makes the most sense to me anyways. Which brings me to my shiny new lunatic idea. My Jeep. It can't be more than a mile down the northern track, still sitting there in front of that fallen pine. I could probably get to it in less than an hour, even with this wet and muddy ground. It had almost a full tank of gas, and I'm pretty sure I could outrun this mimic thing in it if I could get a straight shot down the service road. I definitely don't relish the idea, mind you. Every instinct is screaming at me to sit my butt right down where I am in this tower, and I know the ranger station will start getting a little antsy when Billy doesn't check in after a few days, but I'm also thinking they may extend it out a day or two in light of the foul weather. Maybe 5 days out in the wilderness, and then I'll have a ranger truck parked outside my tower. The question is, what they'll find when they get here. See, I've been thinking about it. Billy definitely knew more about this thing than I do. Certainly enough to not open the door when he heard it outside, pretending to be a Girl Scout selling cookies. That makes me think that maybe the fence and the trapdoor might not be enough to stop it if it really wants in. As pants shittingly terrified as the prospect of leaving the tower and making for the Jeep is, sitting here cornered in my window-lined shack, just waiting for it to show up in the middle of the night is worse. At least I have a chance out there. I still have the Magnum. It's been holstered to my belt since yesterday. They don't issue pea shooters for bear protection out here. This thing is the most powerful handgun in mass production. It'll put down anything in North America as long as you can hit it right. Any normal animal, anyways. Who knows what this thing is capable of? Still, it does provide a level of comfort and gives me some confidence that my plan may work. It's on my side for now. I'm going to try to eat a granola bar to put something in my churning stomach and try to build a little energy. I don't think I've eaten anything since yesterday. After that, I'm grabbing my pack and heading out. Wish me luck. I left my tower shortly after 10 a.m., and let me tell you, those were some of the most difficult first steps I've ever taken in my life. Stepping out through the chain link fence into that open space beyond my small compound felt like I was stepping off the roof of a skyscraper. When I closed the gate behind me, I stood there motionless. Must have been 5 minutes, frozen in place with my hand clenching the grip of my revolver that's holstered at my belt. Even with all the stress and anxiety swirling around in my head, I was amazed at how keen my senses seemed in that moment. I felt like I could hear every rustle of leaves and smell every damp patch of moss in the thousands of acres of wilderness surrounding me. In that moment, I felt very small, very insignificant, trivial. When my chest began to ache, I realized that I'd been holding my breath in subconsciously, afraid to make even the smallest sound. I let out a slow breath and forced myself to breathe normally again, scanning the trees. I turned slowly in a circle, eyes searching for anything that seemed out of place, like it didn't belong. But there was nothing there. Everything seemed normal, at least to me. Casting one last look over my shoulder at the refuge of my tower, I started off along the seldom-used service road to the north, careful of my footing on the muddy and uneven ground. I allowed myself to move at a slow jog, fast enough to make good progress, but not so fast that I was announcing my presence to the world. Not so fast that I couldn't hear the forest around me over my own breathing. I stopped a couple of times during my trek to catch my breath and take a drink of water, and thankfully still seemed alone and unpursued for now. I wondered if it was out there somewhere among the dense trees, hiding in the muted gray shadows of the forest. Or perhaps it had returned to my tower in my absence and found it empty, and was even now tracking my flight along this trail. If I paused long enough, would it suddenly appear, rounding the gentle curve behind me as it caught up to me in order to prefer to move more stealthily among the trees and underbrush, laying in wait alongside the path ahead, ready for my approach? I had to forcibly shake myself of that line of thought. It wasn't doing me any good now. I was committed to my plan. The thought of retracing my steps and returning to my lonely watchtower held just as much terror, because now it's out there, unmanned, unwatched, and abandoned. For all I know, the mimic could be there at this very moment, ransacking my shack. I definitely didn't want to walk in on that little scene. I can promise you that much. I ended up making surprisingly good time on that northern path. It was only about 30 minutes before I saw the dim shape of my Jeep waiting dutifully in the middle of the path ahead. The matte tan paint job and black cloth roof stood out remarkably well against the muted greens and browns of the surrounding forest. Urging my pace to quicken, I covered the last 100 yards before I even realized it and found myself standing at the door, hand on the handle. I paused. A chill ran down my spine, inciting an unbidden shiver. And I realized then how quiet the forest around me was. I wasn't sure how long it had been this way. I felt that something was out of place, and so did the native fauna. On any given day, the trees were alive with the sounds of wildlife. Squirrels and chipmunks chittered, insects buzzed, and 1,000 varieties of birds called and sang from the treetops. Not now, though. Now it was as if they had all left. It felt very alone in that moment. Only not quite alone. Somewhere out there, in that sea of trees, something stalked. Something that didn't belong in the light of day. Something that didn't belong under the watchful eyes of Mother Nature. I was pretty sure she wouldn't have let something like the mimic evolve had it not been hidden in its underground realm. The door of the Jeep was thankfully quiet as I depressed the latch and swung it open. If this had been a horror movie, I'm sure an ear-splitting screech would have erupted from its hinges. But in real life, we tend to take care of these vehicles pretty well. In the best of times, they are the only convenient transportation for 20 miles or more. In times like this, though, it was likely the only thing that would save my sorry ass. I jumped in and pulled the door shut behind me with a dull thunk, subconsciously locking it. I almost laughed when I did that. The entire top of the Jeep was nothing more than canvas and plastic windows. A feisty hamster could probably have penetrated my little haven, and I doubt the mimic would even think twice about it. The Jeep fired up immediately when I turned the key in the ignition, and I threw it in reverse for the most ungraceful 14-point turn you've ever seen on the narrow and muddy service road. Once I got it turned around, I didn't waste any time directing it the way I'd come. The service road was really little more than an uneven and ill-maintained dirt trail, and was only ever used infrequently by the rangers and lookouts. As I'd previously mentioned, it was a rough ride, even for the heavy suspension of my trusty steed, so I had to keep it at a reasonable speed. The very last thing I needed was to snap an axle or bounce myself right off the road and into the trees. Considering the condition of the trail, with the fact that it constantly wound and curved as it progressed, it meant that even my best speed wasn't much faster than I could run on foot. That's okay. Once I got past my tower, the service road was generally better maintained and followed a more or less straight path. I'd be able to build some decent speed there and be out of the wilderness and standing at the ranger station in an hour or so. The abrupt appearance of my tower caused me to feather off the gas as I rounded the last curve from the northern track. I slowed to a crawl and squinted through the now dirty windshield. From here, everything looked exactly like I had left it. The gate still stood closed, and looking up, I could see the trapdoor also appeared shut. Maybe this thing hadn't returned. Hell, maybe this thing wasn't ever going to return. For all I knew, I was headed in the opposite direction. It's not like looking at a GPS on it or anything. It was at that moment that I nearly pissed myself when the radio, still clipped to my belt, squawked, and I heard probably the last thing I had ever expected to hear. "John, are you there?" The signal was pretty clear, but his voice sounded weak, strained. I almost didn't respond. I was frozen in indecision, clouding my mind. I didn't know what I could trust to be true, but I doubted that this mimic had read the radio manual and learned how to operate the handset. I snatched the handset from my shoulder and keyed the mic. "Billy? Holy? Is that you?" He answered me right away, and I thought I could hear relief in his tone, buried under his pained words. "John? Thank God. I was afraid you were gone." My eyes drifted to the trail leading past my tower toward the ranger station, toward safety. Another 5 minutes, and I would have been there. I got to my Jeep, and I was just about to haul ass for the ranger station when I replied, "What's your status?" There was a moment of silence, and I wondered briefly if he hadn't even heard me. But then he answered, "I'm not doing too hot, John. I'm in my tower, but that thing hurt me. I've lost a lot of blood, and I've been drifting in and out. I've patched myself up as best as I could. I stopped the bleeding for my leg." He frowned and closed his eyes for a moment, asking a question I was pretty sure I knew the answer to. "Are you able to get back to your Jeep?" I thought I heard a coughing bark of laughter before he answered. "I don't think so. Pretty banged up, man. What happened?" "Billy, son of a... It got into my tower, managed to get a shot off, but not before it got a jump on me. I took off before it did me in, so I think I hit it. I don't know where it is now, though. My tower is wide open, and it hasn't come back, so maybe it's dead." I doubted that. Things never work out that simply. "Are you stable, Billy? Can you be moved?" Another silence, and then he said, "I know what you're thinking, John. Just turn your Jeep around and haul ass to the ranger station. That's an order." I dropped my forehead to the steering wheel, closing my eyes and cursing. It would have been easier if Billy hadn't radioed me. I know it's selfish. I know I'm an idiot for even thinking it, but I could have been blissfully out of range if he'd only waited for 10 more minutes. Still, I put the throttle down and got the hell out of there. I could still race for the ranger station, have them mobilize a chopper to come back for Billy. But they were at least an hour away. Factor in the spin-up time for the helicopter, and you're talking more like an hour and a half before anyone gets to him. It didn't sound good. Something told me it was unlikely he'd last that amount of time. I could still turn left. I'd likely live. But could I live with myself knowing that I left Billy to die alone in his tower? What if our situations had been reversed? Sure, I might be saying the same words he was saying now, but in my heart, I'd be pleading for that voice on the radio to help me. I couldn't imagine being in his position, lying there, hurt, bleeding out, knowing that his safe haven was wide open and that thing was out there somewhere. Look, I know what you're going to say. I know. I know what you're probably saying already. Don't be a dumbass. This is exactly why everyone dies in a horror movie. I get it, believe me. I get it. But this wasn't a movie. My friend was lying there, dying in his shack. If I could get to him and get him into the Jeep, we could both get out of there, leaving this twisted nightmare behind us. Billy, I'm headed your way. Get ready, because we're going to wrestle you down the stairs and into my Jeep as quickly as we can, I said, cranking the wheel to the right and taking the western trail with more speed than I should have. John, I gave you an order. Get out of here now. Despite the situation, I managed to start a grin as my rig bucked and bounced over the uneven trail. Billy, I'd like to take this opportunity to officially tender my resignation from the fire watch. Now shut your mouth and conserve your strength. I'll be there in 15 minutes. 15 minutes. Trying to be a pretty good guess, and before long, I skidded to a halt outside Tower 12, next to Billy's ride. I opened the door and stepped out into the quiet air, my handgun coming from its holster and held before me like some sort of shield. I took a quick moment to let my eyes roam over the surrounding woodlands for any sign of movement, before quickly jogging around my Jeep and toward the compound's entrance. I passed through an open doorway, taking note of the heavy chain-link gate that was lying twisted 15 feet inside the fence. Another dozen paces, and I was at the base of the stairs, craning my neck to make sure nothing was awaiting me above. I kept the mic on my shoulder and said in a low voice, Billy, I'm outside your tower right now, heading up. For Christ's sake, don't shoot me. I turned the volume on the speaker down just in time for his response. Damn it, John. I told you to leave. Despite his words, the gratitude and relief were clear in his tone. I started up the stairs, revolver still held at the ready as my other hand ran lightly up the railing. My eyes were drawn to the red-black spots staining the gray paint of the steel steps. I found even more of the viscous liquid on the railing as I continued my ascent. Blood, but not Billy's. God, I hope that thing is lying in the woods, breathing its last breath. He definitely hit it, but I had no way of telling how seriously it was hurt. In a human, red blood indicated an arterial bleed, which was typically a fairly significant injury. With this thing, who knew what black-red meant? I climbed the rest of the stairs around the tower and stopped just below the open trapdoor. Billy? I called cautiously. A pause, then came his reply, shaky and with a wheezing sound I didn't like at all. How do I know it's you? Say something I couldn't have heard you say before. I have always admired and respected you, I answered without hesitation. He said under his breath, Come on up. I took another couple of steps, cautiously poking my head through the trapdoor. Billy was sitting upright, more or less, resting his back against the doorframe of his shack and aiming his own handgun generally in my direction. As soon as he saw my face, he dropped his hand to the side, the stainless steel barrel clanging against the metal walkway. As I stepped fully through the trapdoor, I noticed two things immediately. Firstly, there was a significant amount of that black-red goo splattered around. Secondly, I realized how badly injured Billy was. His face had gone gray with a sickly paleness, and his breaths came in ragged hitches. Blood-soaked bandages wrapped both forearms, and his face was covered in a crimson rag taped haphazardly down. His entire khaki park shirt was painted in a hellish tie-dye of shades of red, but it was his leg that worried me the most. A tourniquet had been tied around his thigh, and he was groaning, but the pants leg was a cherry red below that, glistening in the late morning light. Jesus, Billy, I exclaimed, holstering my gun and rushing to his side. He waved me off, saying, All beside me. I know it looks bad. Save it for later. Let's get out of here before that thing decides to come back for another round. I nodded and stood again, taking a quick glance past him into his shack. A twin of my own tower, normally Billy's looked like a war zone now. His table and desk had both been overturned and smashed, along with his base set radio on the floor. On the floor nearby was a satellite phone, its antenna and display obviously smashed during the attack. Lifting his arm over my head, I helped him to his feet. He grimaced in pain, but threw his remaining strength in with mine, and we began the precarious descent through the trapdoor. "Did you at least get to make your phone call?" I asked him as we took the steps carefully and agonizingly slow. He shook his head. "Got here just as I was getting ready to. Excusing your voice, telling me that you were from the Park Service and you were here to help." He looked at me with a shaking astonishment. "Sounded just like you, John." I looked over the catwalk, railing down at it. He winced again as we stumbled on a step. "Almost there, John," he continued. "Well, yeah, I've never seen anything like it." I shook my head as we reached the bottom step and moved onto the rain-soaked ground. I grunted with exertion. "Save it, Billy. We've got a long ride ahead of us. Plenty of time for that later." He just nodded as I maneuvered him and ran to the passenger side of the Jeep and helped him climb in. Once he was in, I hurried back around to the driver's side door, got in, started the engine, and pulled the door closed behind me. Throwing it into reverse, I felt the wheels break loose as I stepped on the gas with a bit too much enthusiasm. I swung the 4x4 around and put it into drive, pointing it back toward my tower and beyond. Safety. I only had a heartbeat's warning from Billy before I saw it barreling from the underbrush at us. It threw itself, a great mass, crashing into the side of the Jeep, and Billy scrambled to get away from it, damn near climbing over the center console in the process and knocking my hands off the wheel. In a panic, the Jeep swung wildly left, and I stomped down on the brakes to avoid slamming into the trees. One of the front wheels dipped off the road, and the steel bumper crashed through a small cluster of oak saplings, halting us abruptly. The engine stalled, and everything went silent in that moment as we froze. My breath hitched in my lungs, and my eyes widened in shock as I laid eyes upon the abomination for the first time. My first impression was that it was much larger than I had thought, but the nightmare visage before me eclipsed such a pedestrian observation. The thing stood in the middle of the trail, still shaking its head as if trying to recover its senses after the collision with a 2-ton vehicle. It looked vaguely humanoid in a sense, but it walked on 4 limbs, clearly proportioned to such a task. It was hairless, and its mottled pink-gray skin stretched taut over muscles, bones, and odd unidentifiable bulges. The limbs seemed to have joints that bent in all the wrong directions and ended in what had been claws, but instead of the distinctive keratin-composed sharp nails that seemed so familiar in the natural world, these seemed to be extensions of the creature's skeletal structure, protruding painfully through its veiny, translucent hide. The worst of all was the bulbous and disproportionately large head, topped with an oddly gaunt-appearing neck. It was oblong and reminded me of the shape of a feline's skull. Its mouth seemed a jagged tear across its face, with ill-fitting and chaotically positioned teeth that didn't seem to allow the mouth to close properly. I couldn't see any eyes, but where they should have been, instead, there were 2 bulbous and cyst-like organs, seemingly bulging and flattening in a slow rhythm as if bladders were filling with air or liquid. I reeled back in revulsion as it turned its sightless head in our direction, searchingly. Flaps of skin on either side of its malformed snout opened slowly, like some obscene blossom composed of milky gray bat wings, and I had the sense that it was using them to try to somehow locate us. It was then I saw where Billy's shot had struck the creature in the face. One of the snout flaps was nearly completely severed, hanging limply in contrast to its sibling. A gouge furrowed by the bullet's travel creased along the right side of the thing's head, piercing and ravaging the bulbous organ on that side and leaving it a deflated sac. When it turned its head further in our direction, I could see clearly where it had bled significantly from the shot, but I was horrified to see that the wound had already sealed itself, leaving a shiny silver scar to mark the incident. "I knew I hit you, you bastard," Billy whispered, half to himself. The mimic stopped its motion, and we watched as the uninjured bladder on its head expanded like a half-filled party balloon. It dipped its head a bit, and we saw two membranous slits in the top of its skull dilate. A moment later, the twisted sound of a human voice assaulted our ears. "I know you're out there." The voice was unmistakably Billy's, but it was distorted and wrong. I thought that the wound from his gunshot probably had something to do with that. The thing raised its head again, turning a bit more in our direction. It took a few experimental steps forward, then paused and lowered its head. This time, we heard what sounded like the painful roar of a beast, almost perfectly replicated, except for that same distortion we had heard previously. "Killed a bear." I held my breath as we watched it again raise its head and take a few more contemplative steps in our direction, slowly swinging its grotesque snout back and forth. I could see how the flaps of skin that were flared open, where its nose should have been twitched minutely back and forth, and I felt like it was using them to listen for us. "Knows we're here somewhere, but he can't see us," whispered Billy, leaning close. "But if it gets close enough, I'm thinking we're done for." I looked over at Billy and realized that there was no way he'd be able to make a run for it in his condition. From the look of the thing growing ever closer to where we cowered in our Jeep, I thought it was likely we didn't have much time before it got close enough to hear our breathing, our heartbeats, or whatever, even inside the 4x4. And when that happened, I knew what would come next. Billy closed his eyes for a moment and turned to me. There was something in his eyes then, sort of acceptance. So he didn't like it one bit. "Get ready with the cannon," he whispered. "Only gonna get one chance at this." "What are you talking about?" I asked. A moment later, I had my answer. Billy took a deep breath and mustered every bit of strength to fling the door open and stagger out of the Jeep. "I'm right here," he shouted, limping weakly across the road from the Jeep. The mimic whipped its head in his direction instantly, but tilted its head to the side, seemingly momentarily puzzled at this unexpected turn of events. Billy held his own magnum in his hand, but it was too weak to raise it towards the beast. Still, he pulled the trigger, and a resounding boom seemed to shake the air. The mimic flinched at the defining sound of the gunshot, the flap of membrane at its snout snapping shut protectively. But its stunned hesitation didn't last very long. In an instant, faster than I would have thought possible, it launched itself on powerful limbs at Billy, knocking him to the ground and tearing at him with teeth and claws. I heard my friend screaming, then a horrible soul-rending sound that I'll never forget as long as I live. But now was my chance, and I took it. I swung the door open and stepped out of the Jeep, my gun coming free of its holster in the same moment. The creature was preoccupied with what was left of Billy, but as soon as I brought the gun up and thumbed back the hammer, its head swung around at me. It crouched like a compressed spring, preparing to launch, but I was quicker. The report of the gunshot was incredible, and the recoil from the powerful round rocked my wrist back painfully. The beast staggered, and I saw a burst of blood and tissue explode from a wound where its shoulder met its neck. It howled an otherworldly cry, sounding like a bedlam mixture of man and beast. But though the wound seemed terrible, it tried once again to throw itself at me. I was set on my course, though, and took step after step toward the creature, pulling the trigger again and again until the gun ran dry. All I was left with was the clicking of the hammer and a high-pitched ringing in my ears. The acrid smell of gunpowder stung my nose, and by the time I finally stopped, I found myself within only a few feet of the horrific thing. 6 blackened holes stippled the neck and torso of the creature where the bullets had entered, and I knew that the destruction of their exits on the opposite side would be far worse. The mimic lay sprawled across the ruined body of Billy Johnson, its weight crushing whatever had been left of my friend. Black-red blood spread out from beneath the thing's bulk like an oil spill across a smooth floor. I noted with some muted surprise that the creature still twitched and slowly flexed its powerful muscles, and a wheezing sound was quietly emanating from the slits on the top of its skull. I holstered my empty handgun and scanned around the ground for what I knew was there. A moment later, I spotted it. Billy's own magnum, lying half buried in the muck where it had been torn from its grip under the weight of the monster. I snatched it up and shook it clear of most of the mud and grass. Opening the cylinder, I saw that only one unfired round remained. That was enough, though. I approached the horror before me without apprehension or pause, my eyes focused on this thing that had caused so much pain and terror. I thumbed the hammer back and placed the muzzle against the mimic's head, which still convulsed with some small remaining life. I didn't know if it would be able to heal from the wounds I had already inflicted. Logic told me it was unlikely, but the silvery scar I'd seen from Billy's previous encounter caused me to question everything I thought was possible. I felt the tremors from the creature vibrate through the gun as the barrel rested against its skull, right between where its eyes should have been. I tensed my finger on the cold steel of the trigger, and the crack of the gunshot echoed throughout the forest. It was done. But even as I walked back numbly to the Jeep and restarted the engine, I wondered if that was true. I thought back to the journal I'd read, written more than 130 years before, and how it alluded to the tales of this creature going back long before then. As I drove the Jeep along the rough and winding service road, I wondered at the possibility that what we encountered was the only one of its kind. That the same beast had somehow terrorized cultures separated from each other by great time and distance, spawning the legends that the author of the journal and his companions pursued. It didn't seem likely. And now the door was open. The job of a Yosemite Park Ranger isn't what most people imagine. A lot of people picture us as law enforcement types, handing out tickets and enforcing park rules, when really that's a very niche aspect of it. Mostly, we're just here to assist you, handing out maps, not speeding tickets, and giving people directions to the best views or ideal camping spots. We remind people about safety and weather conditions from day to day. But the main thing we do, and this is more vital than people realize, is that we're just here in case anyone gets lost or hurt. We deal with a lot of belligerent people who like to think the park is their personal playground, where they can do whatever they want. It's my job to remind them to follow the rules, to dispose of their trash properly, to pick up after their dog, and to clip its leash back on while walking the trails. Some people take this as a personal assault on their freedoms, when really, I'm just looking out for the safety of the other visitors, like cyclists and horseback riders who share the paths. Dogs can be unpredictable and can misbehave on trails, and we have to look out for everyone, not just them. Still, I don't get a lot of positive feedback for enforcing these rules. Nobody likes to be told what to do. Trust me, I get it. Every once in a while, though, something interesting happens to break up the boredom and monotony of the job. Last summer, I was walking around at night, doing a patrol of the campgrounds, when I saw something rustling around in the bushes. A guy came crawling out, dressed in a furry dog costume. I asked him if he was okay, and he just barked at me and crawled away in the opposite direction. A little while after that, I saw him chasing another person on all fours, someone dressed as a Catwoman, who went scampering away and hid in a camper van, laughing excitedly and making purring sounds. She licked the dirt from her fur pants with a long tongue. When she saw me watching, she clawed the air in front of her face, hissing territorially. It's not how I would choose to spend my Friday nights, but I'm not one to judge. By far the most interesting thing which has ever happened to me at Yosemite occurred last summer. It wasn't just interesting, it was utterly terrifying. Every night when I fall asleep, I have nightmares about that day. Every time I close my eyes, I picture those dark tunnels in the rock face. It all started when someone called in a report saying they were on Cathedral Lake Trail when their brother went missing. The pair had been out hiking and got separated somehow. At first, I thought it was just a routine mishap. People go missing in Yosemite all the time. It's no big deal in most cases, since usually the missing parties are found quickly enough. More than half the time, alcohol is involved, and I have to remind people to pace themselves if they want to indulge while camping or hiking. But every once in a while, those missing people don't turn up, and we have to dispatch much larger search parties. In this case, I went in on my own first, heading to where the man had called us from. I drove in on an ATV, since it was a 16-mile round trip. When I got there, the guy looked frantic. He ran over to me and started speaking way too fast to understand. I told him to slow down and just give me the facts. It's important to stay calm in these types of situations. Okay, I said, taking a deep breath and letting it out. He started talking again, a little bit slower this time. We were walking on the trail. He was right beside me. Then I turned to look at the lake, and when I looked back, he's just gone. Just gone. I tried to get a sense of whether the man had been drinking or doing drugs. It's not that I'm trying to assume the worst in people, but we have to think of these things. The simplest explanation is usually the right one, after all. It was much easier to imagine the two brothers taking sips of a Mickey and one of them getting separated and lost than to imagine one of them being abducted by aliens or taken in a very selective rapture. All right, slow down for a second. Take some deep breaths. What's your name? Let's start with that. Greg, he said, his face turning a shade less purple as he began to inhale air with trembling breaths. In and out. Okay, Greg. I took out my notepad, jotting this down along with his last name, which I'll leave out for the sake of privacy. And what's your brother's name? Dave, he said, sniffling as if he'd been crying recently. And where's the last place you saw your brother? Let's retrace your steps. He started protesting, saying that wasn't going to help, but I convinced him we had to at least try. Greg led me back a little way to where he'd seen his brother last. I walked back here already and I looked around, all around here, before calling you guys. I thought maybe he went off the trail to take a leak and tripped, hit his head, something like that. I don't know. I was grasping at straws, but I think something... He hesitated. Something what? What do you think? Something took him, like those stories you hear about. He looked embarrassed, but I tried to get more out of him. Which stories? You know, you hear those stories about Yosemite and other national parks. I'm sure you've heard about them, even if you're not in on the conspiracy. Stories where people go missing like this, and it makes no sense. Someone turns their back for a second, and their son, or their sister, or whoever, is just gone, disappeared. Like Dave. I saw it on YouTube. Uh-huh, I replied, not sure what corner of the internet this guy had been visiting. Well, that doesn't happen around here, okay? I can assure you. Let's just keep looking. I'm sure he'll turn up. But the longer we looked, the less we found. It really did seem like the man's brother had just vanished. I was about to call in for more support, maybe even a canine unit, when the man yelled from a little ways off the trail, saying he found something. Following the sound of his voice, I eventually came to find him at the base of the mountain, face to face with the granite wall. At first, I didn't understand what he was doing there, so far in the forest. But as I got closer, I saw there was actually a cave, well hidden in the rock face. It blended in perfectly with the mountainside until you were almost nose to nose with the pale gray stone. Good job, I said, patting him on the shoulder. But then I looked around at our surroundings, getting nervous. We were far from the path, in the thick part of the forest, which was overgrown and tangled with vines and shrubbery. Do you think he would have gone into this cave on his own? I asked. Greg looked around, as if checking to see if his brother had left a message for him. There was nothing. It's not like him to just leave me on the trail alone, especially not for this long. If this was a prank or something, he'd have come back by now. I can just tell something's not right. Has your brother played pranks on you like this before? I asked. The man was in his 20s, and his brother was probably of a similar age. Young men occasionally get lost or injured trying to scare each other by pulling pranks or filming videos in the woods. It was rare, but it had happened before. Once or twice, he admitted. I didn't call you guys for a while because I thought he was messing with me. I wouldn't put it past him, but not for this long. I was getting annoyed. Mosquitoes were biting my neck, and I was sweating in the heat of the afternoon after marching through the foliage for hours. I imagined the guy hiding inside the cave, trying to scare his younger brother. Maybe he'd fallen asleep in his dark hiding place, or he was just pushing it too far. But either way, I was upset. If this was a prank, it had wasted most of my afternoon when I could have been doing better things. It probably annoyed me even more because I have my own older brother back home who played tricks on me in my younger days, and this was bringing back bad memories. "All right, you can come out of there right now," I yelled, marching into the cave, thinking the young man would be hiding in a small alcove, and I'd give him a piece of my mind. I turned a corner and saw a dark tunnel leading deep into the darkest recesses of the granite. It seemed to go on forever. This made no sense. As far as I knew, there was no tunnel in this location. One this large would have been mapped and reported, but this had been well hidden, nearly invisible in the rock face. I wondered if anyone knew about it, and I wondered if it was safe. I didn't feel comfortable going in any further. The dark space seemed to stretch endlessly into the distance, and I was getting an eerie feeling standing there. It felt like I could almost hear voices whispering from all around me. The words were lost in the echoing cave, and I got a strong sensation that we weren't alone, like there were icy fingers walking their way slowly up my spine. The other man came in behind me, marveling at the cave for a second before continuing to press onward. "Come on," Greg said, forging ahead. "He might be in trouble." He was anxious to keep going. Not scared enough of this horrifying place with whispering voices coming from the shadows all around. His apparent lack of fear made me twice as scared. "I'm going back for help," I said, shuffling backward. "This isn't safe. Nobody knows we're here." My training and instincts were overwhelming my curiosity. But Greg didn't care. The man just continued going forward, disappearing into the darkness. A few seconds later, he was gone, and there was no indication that he had ever existed in the first place, except for my memory of him. "Greg!" I called out into the black abyss. There was no response. He might as well have been a ghost. An overwhelming urge to follow him rushed over me, and I took a few stumbling steps forward, feeling hypnotized by that black tunnel leading on and on forever ahead of me. But then I shook my head, slapping my face as I tried to wake myself up from whatever trance I was in that was overruling my common sense. I turned around and left the cave, my legs shaking and my hands unsteady as I called for assistance. After meeting the search party back at the trail, we went through the woods again to find the cave hiding within the 10,000-foot-tall rock face of Cathedral Peak. But it was gone. I remembered having trouble finding it the first time, thinking it was well hidden among the pale gray surface of the mountainside. You had to be nearly face to face with the wall to see it. It was so invisible among the crags and the boulders. I tried to tell my supervisor and the other members of the search party, but they didn't believe me. They said there was no tunnel there. They looked for hours and found nothing. Helicopters swept the area. More teams with more dogs, bloodhounds and German shepherds. But nothing was turned up. There was no trace of anyone having been out there. Except for me. Except for me, dumbfounded for the rest of the week, and for the rest of the summer, I couldn't focus on anything. My mind kept going back to that conversation I'd had with the man on the trail named Greg. The man who lost his brother and then disappeared into a cave that didn't exist. More and more, I began to wonder what would have happened if I'd followed after him. It took a full year for me to build up the courage to go back out to that exact same spot again. It happened to be on the same date, around the same time of day. Only this time, I wasn't on duty. It was my weekend off, so I had plenty of time to comb the area for clues. My backpack was full of provisions, and I had enough to last for a night or two in the woods. Maybe longer, if necessary. Somehow, I knew. I just had a feeling. If I went back on that day and at that time, it would be there, the cave that didn't exist. Cathedral Peak loomed above me, getting larger as I made my way through the forest, moving toward it. The gray clouds above were shrouding the sun in darkness, while the thickening canopy blocked any remaining light from overhead. A chill ran through me, causing me to shiver involuntarily as I laid my eyes on the black hole in the rock face. So plain, clear to see now. Taking a step forward, I found myself standing right in front of it, and I reached out my hands to feel the outline of the entryway, as if to confirm it was real. I took a deep breath, like a diver about to submerge, and went inside. The air was cold and damp, with a strange coppery smell. My flashlight was on my belt, and I grabbed it, but decided not to turn it on. I was getting a strange feeling, like I was in an unsafe place and needed to stay silent, hidden. There was a sound coming from up ahead. I couldn't place it. It was like a slurping, chewing sound, like someone tearing meat from bones with their teeth. As I went deeper and deeper into the tunnel, the air became colder, so damp. I felt droplets of water running down my face, into my eyes. A trickle of light was filtering in from somewhere as well, causing the cavern to faintly glow in places. The air seemed to shimmer and dance in front of my eyes. As I went deeper and deeper, feeling entranced as I stumbled along in the shadows, I realized there was something wrong with me, as if I had been drugged. But strangely, I no longer cared. In fact, I found the sensation quite pleasant. But then I was abruptly awoken from my daydream as I came around a corner and saw the horror unfolding within the guts of Cathedral Peak. I can't possibly explain what I saw down there, and the shadows obscured most of it, drenching the monstrous creature in darkness. The impression I got was of something like an octopus or squid, crossbred with some oversized plant or dark fungus of some sort, sucking and slurping, chewing and crunching something between its teeth. After a few moments of inspection, I realized it was a person's face that was being eaten, as the details could just barely be seen in the dim light of the cave. Skin was being stripped from its cheeks, the eyelids ripped off, the lips peeled back and slurped up like noodles. Tentacles like tangled vines were slithering and sliding across the pale gray stone floor all around me. At first, I thought it was mud beneath my feet, but when I came fully to my senses, I realized it was blood mingling and mixing with the dust beneath my feet, creating a dark, toxic red slurry which sucked at my boot heels. There were tentacle vine things everywhere. I realized with numb shock my feet were actually stepping on some of them, and I was amazed the creature hadn't noticed me yet, if it was a part of them. But it was obviously caught up with whatever meal it was currently ingesting. Feeling very glad I hadn't turned on my flashlight, I began to back away very slowly, my boots crunching across the writhing tentacles. A sick knot in my stomach was rising up and threatening to make me puke, fear and revulsion twisting my gut. My mind was spinning, and my thoughts were racing. Understanding there was a very good chance I would never leave this place, I tried desperately not to step on any more of the squirming, writhing tentacles which moved and twisted on the floor of the cave, soaking and basking in the blood which had been spilled everywhere like pigs rolling happily in the mud. There's no possible way there could be so much of it, I thought. No one person has this much blood inside them. This is like a flowing river. And then I saw the others. They were hanging, suspended from the ceiling, from the walls, from everywhere, amidst the purple vine tentacles. They breathed in and out, still being kept alive, but just barely. Dozens of them were strung up and down the length of the cave, their chests rising and falling with weak breaths, but none of them opening their eyes or speaking. It was like they were sleeping. After a few long moments of searching, I found him, Greg, the hiker from the trail, who was looking for his brother. He was hanging upside down from the wall just beside me, his eyes closed. Parts of him were missing, a piece of his cheek, part of his hand. The wounds were slowly healing. The creature, whatever it was, kept its victims alive down there. I realized it was ingesting them slowly, perhaps even using other pieces of its victims as nutrients to feed the ones who were dying of starvation, like an otherworldly pyramid scheme built of blood and human remains. Tucking that mental image away, I grabbed Greg's shoulder, hoping to wake him up quietly. His eyes shot open a second after I touched him, revealing only the whites, and he began to screech. And I don't mean screeching like he was screaming out of fear or pain or anything like that. This was an inhuman alarm cry, which signified to me immediately that there was no shred of humanity left in him. He was now a part of the hive mind of this creature and its tentacle army. As his head turned on a swivel, I saw smaller tentacles were wrapped around him, going into his brain, into his neck, invading his ears and eyes, and drilled into his spinal column as well. I screamed involuntarily seeing these details and heard the creature in the tunnel as it recognized my presence. It wasn't fast, whatever it was, but it was huge, and I was in its home. The cave shook around me, dust and pebbles falling from the stone ceiling. As I backed away from the hiker and he continued to shriek, beneath my feet, the vines were suddenly moving quickly, sliding around so I couldn't find my balance, whipping back and forth. As soon as my shoes found purchase on the stone floor beneath me, I began to run. The tunnel was alive all around me now, the vines twisting and bending toward me, reaching out like greedy hands trying to grab me as I raced past. Looking over my shoulder, I saw the amorphous creature's central girth was finding its way through the cave and was moving my way, a lot faster now than I would have thought possible. But then again, I wouldn't have thought any of this was possible before living it. The light of the entryway was just up ahead, and I could smell the fresh air. I could see the sun. And then my feet suddenly slipped, as if someone had pulled a rug out from under me, and I went crashing to the ground, face first. My jaw closed hard, and I bit my tongue, causing it to bleed, the taste of copper filling my mouth. A second later, I tried to get to my feet. The mental image of those poor trapped people could be seen clearly in my mind's eye. Thinking back, I think the creature, whatever it was, needed us to be unsuspecting. If we were aware of what it was doing, its hypnosis wouldn't work. It was like a chemical it released to cause people to want to explore the cave, like a pheromone that insects use to communicate. Only it was geared toward people. But it didn't work well if you knew about it, and if you understood what the creature's purpose was. Still, it released more of that pheromone, or whatever chemical it was using to lure people in. And I actually felt my legs grow a little heavier. My eyelids, too. There was a powerful urge to rest now, and it felt like I had just worked 3 night shifts and really needed to sleep. But then the wave of hypnosis passed, and I felt the rumbling of the ground beneath me. That broke me from my trance again and caused me to scramble to my feet from the cave floor and run. As I neared the cave entrance and sprinted toward it, leaving my backpack far behind in an effort to lighten the load, I saw the rocks were actually closing in, narrowing the gap. The entryway was shrinking. Somehow, it was the vines. I realized they were what was camouflaging the entrance, their color changing to match the pale gray stone. I picked up my pace, the twisting forms beneath me making it even more difficult. I didn't dare risk a glance over my shoulder, feeling the rumbling of the floor and knowing the bulk of the creature was just behind me, closing in. The gap of the exit was narrowing even further, shrinking to the size of a dartboard. I dove headfirst into it, imagining my face slamming into a sheer rock wall as it suddenly turned to stone right in front of me, sealing me into this little dark labyrinth of suffering forever with the rest of those tortured souls. My eyes were squinted tightly shut as I felt the vines pulling and tearing at me as I went through the gap. For an instant, they squeezed in around my midsection, threatening to stop me like Winnie the Pooh after an unfortunate attempt at pilfering honey. But I popped out of the hole, and it sealed behind me in an instant. I heard a loud crash as the creature flew headlong into its own obstruction trap it had created for me, to keep me there. It hindered its own escape, preventing it from chasing after me. I could hear it thrashing and clawing at the vines, desperate for more flesh to sustain itself. Whatever it was growing too large even for its own control. Left alone to feed in the heart of the mountain, the creature would eventually destroy itself, would consume its own flesh to sate its monstrous hunger, like a snake eating its own tail. I had a very strong suspicion that was true. With that very specific idea in mind, I wandered back to my car. It was easier now, without the backpack and all the gear. but the walk back out to the cave would be harder. There would be lots to carry next time. After a trip to the hardware store, I went back out to the trail. It was nighttime now, and the place was abandoned. I borrowed one of the Ranger ATVs and took my supplies out to the spot where the cave had been. After bringing a few buckets of water from the lake, I began my work. Since I had marked the cave, it was easy to find again, and I began laying down the fast-drying cement on the mountain face. As park rangers, our job is actually to stop people from vandalizing mountains in this way. But I got the feeling Mother Nature would forgive me. It was my job to protect this place, after all, to protect the people who visited here. And nothing could protect people from this thing. It was best to seal it away forever, to let it slowly consume itself. Without a fresh supply of hikers, it would eventually run out of calories. It would eventually expire. It was only a matter of time. The vine tentacles squirmed beneath the layer of cement, groggily reaching out for me, trying to pull me in. I grabbed the trowel and slopped another thick coating of cement on top of them, and watched as it rapidly began to dry. The tentacles began to smooth out and settle back down again, falling asleep and looking very much like the rock face of the mountain again. That inhuman shriek could be heard from inside again, much louder this time, as if all the hikers the creature had abducted had woken up at the same instant, for just a second, and realized their predicament. "Sorry, Greg," I muttered to myself, alone in the dark forest. "I told you not to go in there." A man once paid me to be hunted for sport. I had stumbled across his post when I was browsing the web for work. I was looking for some sort of side gig to pass the time. I was at a bit of a crossroads in my life. I had quit my previous job to break away from the redundancy it had sucked me into. It was a spontaneous decision with no real-life planning. Luckily, in this day and age, the internet caters to people like me, people who don't care about chasing money or don't want to be tied down. It wasn't the money I was after, but the change it would provide. I felt like I couldn't enjoy anything in life, like I was just going through the motions. That night, I had been scrolling for quite some time, skimming over job posts, help wanted here, shorthanded there. I didn't think I would find anything that would suit me. It all seemed like the same thing disguised under a different title. That was until I found this particular ad. I thought it was a scam at first, comical dollar signs on each side of the Craigslist title, like a trap set for the elderly in search of credit card numbers. I clicked on it anyway, curiosity getting the better of me. In all caps, the posting read, "Big money for manhunt volunteers." At least it was to the point. The details below gave a brief introduction as to what the job entailed. I skimmed them over with amusement, half of me doubting if it was true, the other half kind of hoping it was. As ridiculous as the prospect was, I had to admit it was exciting. There were some requirements for the job, however, and I was surprised to find that I fit the bill. Must be male. Must be young and fit if possible. Must not be afraid of the dark. Must come alone. No cell phones, no firearms, no police. Must meet the night before to discuss further. The list went on for a while, but ultimately ended with a phone number and a typed signature from someone simply named Bob. I found myself thinking it over. I didn't exactly have anything to lose, no family or friends. I always lived alone. The idea of wanting to pack up at a moment's notice never seemed to sit well with any of the significant others I had in the past. I don't know if it was stupidity or the need for adventure, but in the end, I found myself grabbing my phone. I mean, how often do people get to say they were hunted for sport? The money wouldn't hurt either. I gave him a ring. The man who answered the call was tipsy but eager, and when I mentioned my interest in his post, he seemed to be ecstatic, like I was calling to give him the lead role in a movie. The conversation was a little awkward considering the reasoning behind the call itself, but after a few minutes of cryptic back and forth, we agreed on a meeting place. I was a few towns away, but he insisted I meet him closer to his side of the woods. The hunt would be at his estate, and I should stay in town so I was well rested for the event. We would meet at a local bar called the Sixth Shot to discuss terms and conditions. He seemed determined, like he had been waiting for someone for a while. He said he would understand if I was in no hurry, but with my current status of unemployment and lack of overall plans, I found myself meeting his energy. I had to admit the concept was a little exciting, if it was real at all. We decided to meet the next day. The Sixth Shot was a bustling little place. A neon sign with a smoking gun made it easy to find. When I arrived, I found the guy immediately. He looked about how you'd expect a manhunter to look. He pulled it off well. A black polo and tan cargos, a shiny shaved head with a thick curled mustache, all worn on a very tan and muscular body. He was sitting at the bar alone, and he lit up like a Christmas tree when he saw me. Like he knew. He patted the stool next to him like he was welcoming a long-lost friend. When I crossed the bar, I was met with a firm handshake and a pat on the shoulder. He told me he was delighted to meet me, and drinks were on him. After a brief introduction, he got a glass of top-shelf bourbon for himself, while I sipped on an Irish red ale. I had acquired a taste for it recently. Considering he was trying to hire me with the intent to murder me, he sounded like a pretty cool guy. We got to know each other a little before getting to the serious stuff. The people around, enjoying their drinks, were none the wiser. The man known as Bob was actually Robert Callahan, a man born into a world of wealth and, as it seemed, perpetual boredom. His father ran a very successful chain of automotive stamping companies that he inherited from his grandfather. By the time his father passed, there were so many buildings and people assigned to making the gears turn efficiently across the globe without his input. He was able to live a life of leisure on a 7-figure income without as much as lifting a finger. The companies ran themselves as he got older, and he filled his adult years with seeking thrills across the globe. He tried anything that got his adrenaline pumping, from skydiving to whitewater rafting. He took a liking to hunting, which he said had started an escapade of finding the world's most dangerous predators and killing them, no matter the cost. He said he had seen it all, but in all his years, there was one thing he hadn't bagged: a human. I laughed at his extraordinary lifestyle, feeling a bit mundane when it was my turn to share stories. Mine was far from exciting. I left the more boring bits out, but I told him I spent most of my 20s as a park ranger. It kept me close to nature and the outdoors, but when it's all you look at, it tends to lose its luster. I left that to be a cab driver in a big city, something that kept me in transit and entertained for a while. Always moving, with so many people to observe in the busy city life. But in time, I found myself too contained to the city itself, which is why I recently quit. This brings me to about where I was right now, discussing being hunted by another man. He was fascinated, jotting down notes in a little pocketbook while he sipped his bourbon. We conversed for a time. I finished a couple of beers, and he ordered another pour of bourbon. The conversation was nice. It had been a while since the last time I went out with friends. Despite the fun I was having, we couldn't beat around the bush forever. When it came time to discuss the actual terms of our agreement, his face turned serious. I would be paid $5,000 tonight. Granted, I still wanted to go through with it. He said this would help me settle accounts before the event. He said he owned a mansion outside of town with over 30 acres of forest land. He was outside city limits. His nearest neighbor was 6 miles away. No one would hear screams or gunshots. We would start tomorrow night. I was supposed to get to his estate at 10 p.m. After my arrival, I would get 15 minutes to head into the forest as a head start. He explained when the 15 minutes were up, he would promptly signal with a flare. If I had any second thoughts, I needed to address them and withdraw from the woods before the signal. If I was still in the woods when the flare went off, I would be shot on sight. He said I would be paid $10,000 an hour if I survived. The hunt would go on until dawn, and if I was still alive come daybreak, I would be free. He would be armed with a hunting rifle and a combat knife. I would be armed with my wits. It was evident it wasn't in his plans for me to survive. But that was something I had already come to terms with. He studied my face when he said these things, perhaps trying to gauge my reaction. I tried my best to play it cool, despite being a little nervous. "Does any of this bother you?" he eventually asked, downing the last of his drink. "No, not really. I've always just tried to go with the flow. Doing that made me stumble upon your offer. Maybe if I get out and live a little, it'll encourage me to settle down for a bit more. That is, if I make it out alive." I winked, and we both had a laugh. "You're a riot. If I wasn't trying to kill you, I think we'd be pretty good friends." After all the details were ironed out, he paid the tab, and it was time for us to take our leave. We shook on it before going our separate ways. He was excited for the next day, a pep in his step carrying him to his obnoxiously lifted truck. He burned out as he left, almost rear-ending a Buick as he left the parking lot. I watched him go, feeling oddly serene in the cool night air. It was hard to describe. There was no one waiting for me to come back, no one to give me a courtesy call if I didn't show up. I didn't know if it was the thrill of the challenge or the drastic break in monotony. I spent my life trying not to be a creature of habit. Maybe this would be the last shift off course, or maybe tomorrow I would die and not have to worry about it anymore. With the moon shining bright and the cool breeze on my neck, I decided I would take a walk before sleeping in my car for the night. It might be my last time to enjoy a night like this. The next day, I woke in the backseat of my car, feeling oddly rejuvenated despite my choice of bed for the night. Through the blinding afternoon rays, I found my phone and checked my bank account. He was a man of his word. The $5,000 had been wired as promised. I decided I would go into town, indulge in some of the local variety, and find a place to shower before meeting Robert at the estate. I climbed into the front seat and left the parking lot on my way into town. I called my landlord and canceled my lease. I was already living in and out of boxes, and my lease was month to month, so I wouldn't exactly be missed. After getting something to eat, I called and canceled all my utility accounts, electricity, internet, stuff like that. I had already put in my resignation at the cab company. There wasn't really any ties to my life at my apartment. I would either survive till dawn and get the biggest payday of my life, or not have to worry about the next step if I failed. Either way, this was the end of the current chapter of my life. After spending the day driving around town, I found myself heading over to Robert's property. The sun was already making its way into the horizon. His driveway was long and winding, leading to a gigantic house that looked like the surrounding forest was trying to swallow it. When I pulled up, it was already almost dark. A butler greeted me at the mansion, an old man carrying a silver tray covered in a soft cloth. He opened the car door and let me out, introducing himself only as Charles. "I will be taking your belongings now," he said. "If you don't make it out, they'll be destroyed at sunrise." He held out the tray. "Of course," I said, handing over my phone, wallet, and keys. After placing them on the tray, he offered a smile. "Would you like a refreshment before heading in? Mr. Callahan's staff will accommodate you before heading into the forest. He truly appreciates you answering his ad." "I'm fine. Thank you. I guess I'd rather just get to it," I said, wiping my sweaty palms on my jeans. "Of course. If you'll just follow me, it's right this way." He gestured for me to follow him. Charles escorted me through the house. The inside was furnished top to bottom with luxurious wooden furniture, bearskin rugs, chandeliers made of gold, and paintings from the Renaissance era. The estate was definitely worth a fortune. We passed by a trophy room filled wall to wall with mounts of animals from across the globe. They seemed to stare with their glass eyes, following us as we made our way through. Charles made no effort to engage in conversation, and neither did I. The other end of the mansion consisted of a large patio waiting for us. There was Robert, who seemed to be preparing for a little hunt. He was running a large combat knife over a whetstone slowly and methodically as we approached. Propped up next to him was a rifle, the bolt pulled back, several cartridges laid out on the glass table next to it, and the flare gun. "The time is approaching," said Charles, and Robert nodded. He wiped the blade off and sheathed it on his belt. I looked at his loadout on the table, starting to feel sick to my stomach. This was seriously happening. Now that I was here and seeing him fully prepared, I couldn't help but feel like I was in over my head. Robert stood and grabbed his rifle. He picked up each .308 cartridge and loaded them slowly, one at a time, until it was full. He racked the bolt forward, slung the rifle on his shoulder, and grabbed the flare gun. 15 minutes. Then flare, he said. Having second thoughts? He asked, twirling the flare gun on his finger. No, not really, I said, making my way off the patio. I wasn't exactly sure what to say in a situation like this, so I figured it was best just to get going. Excellent. I'll see you on the other side, he saluted me, and Charles gave me a nod. I turned and left the patio, making my way into the woods. Each step got heavier as I approached the trees, the darkness behind them getting eerier the closer I got. When I reached the tree line, I looked back at the mansion. Robert and Charles just watched expectantly. I swallowed and ducked in, feeling the full weight of my decision, perhaps a little too late. Once the mansion was no longer visible, I started jogging. I was mindful of my footsteps. A stray log or vine could trip me up. During my time as a park ranger, I spent dozens of hours hiking trails. I would survey the land weekly, picking up discarded things like trash and lost clothing. This landscape was much different, however. The ground was uneven, years of collecting leaves, buried and fallen limbs, and jagged rocks. I was wearing decent boots, but the terrain was unforgiving. One misplaced step, and I could roll or break an ankle. I wouldn't be able to rush too much, so I maintained a steady pace, hoping to put enough distance between us and maybe find a decent place to hide. With the sunset and no light source, I couldn't see very far in front of me. I tried not to think about how much time had passed. I just focused on pushing forward. The trees started to crowd, giant maples with lush branches blocking the moonlight. I ducked under them quickly. A twisted branch snagged my shirt, and I shook it loose. Birds screeched and roused from their perch, flapping away in a panic at my presence, their cries echoing into the night, sending a chill down my spine. There's nothing to be afraid of, I thought to myself. Not yet, at least. I came to a small clearing and took a second to catch my breath. I leaned on a tree, shaking clumps of mud and pine needles from my boots. The ground was wetter than I had anticipated. Off in the distance behind me, there was an echoing pop, and I looked to see the flare reaching toward the sky, a little orange ball of fire. I pushed off the tree and continued. I had to keep moving. I ran across the clearing. Each step squished on the ground as I went on. My third stride, my boot stepped on something awkward and hard. By the time I heard the clicking sound, I knew it was already too late. The sudden force clamped down on both sides of my ankle. I could do nothing but cry in pain. I stumbled awkwardly to the ground, agony shooting through my leg as the wind was knocked out of me. I looked down at the bear trap, blood oozing from where the metal jaws were buried. I was frustrated at my foolishness. Of course, he had put traps in the woods. Why wouldn't he? I forced the jaws apart, the mechanism creaking, begging to bite down again. My hands shook, holding the slippery metal, and my leg was barely free. I let it snap shut. The sound of steel on steel clanked into the night, so loud it bounced off the trees. A second later, I heard an excited whooping noise. I'd heard him. He would be coming. I tried to see my ankle in the dark. There were nasty gashes on either side, but I didn't think it was broken. I got back up. It would hold weight. It was just hurting like hell. I didn't want to look back when I pushed forward, panic starting to set in, trying to regulate my breathing. I moved as quickly as I could, one strong step, one baby limp. I scanned the ground, looking for more traps. There had to be more, surely. Branches whipped my cheeks and pulled at my clothes. I tried to be more careful, but I just couldn't see them quick enough. My left foot squelched with every step, blood soaking through my sock into the laces. I pressed on, hurdling a large dead log. I had to find a spot to hide for a moment to catch my breath. My heart was racing. I was having trouble thinking rationally as I could with the situation. A wave of fear washed over me for the first time in a long time. I'd gotten what I wanted, a thrill to make me feel alive. But as I looked down at my mangled leg, I was starting to regret it. Gunfire cracked in the distance, branches next to my ear exploded, specks of bark and dust hitting my face from the racing bullet. I threw myself to the ground and started crawling, dragging my injured ankle with me. I dragged myself to a large pine tree and sat behind it, trying to come up with a plan. The gun went off again, closer this time. The round punched into the tree, shaking loose needles that fell from above. I squinted in the dark, trying to see ahead. In front of me, the ground started to slope, and I could finally make out the sound of rushing water. It could be a creek or a small river. Keeping behind the large pine, I slowly stood, trying to stick to the shadows until I was ready. I pushed off and started to run for the slope, hearing the gunfire again. As soon as I was in view, a fierce pain ripped through my shoulder, and my arm went limp, but I wouldn't stop. I started down the hill. I could see the shimmering surface of the creek below, something bobbing in the water, rotted logs from the looks of it. I needed to get down there, get under the water, and use the logs as cover. I worked my way down the slope. The ground was wet, each step threatening to slide out from underneath me. I heard footsteps now, breaking sticks and brushing trees as they tried to catch up. Another gunshot. The bullet whizzed over my head and missed. I tried to go down further and crouched, but my feet were too unstable. I focused on the water, a little bit closer and closer, like it was my salvation. I was almost there. Behind me, I could hear the racking of the bolt-action rifle. I shot a panicked look behind me. I could barely see him working through the trees, 20 yards away. As I turned back to the creek, my good foot got caught on something. I fell forward, hit the ground hard, and started to roll painfully and awkwardly in the dark. I watched my descent in a swirl of moonlight and darkness, my elbows and knees colliding with the earth as I went. I came to a stop at the edge of the water, lying on my back, gasping for air. I barely moved, my vision spinning as I looked up at the sky. I could hear him coming down the hill slowly and carefully. He knew he had won. He was taking his time now. Exhausted and defeated, I looked at the creek. It wasn't logs I had seen floating. Bodies. Several of them, bloating and rotting in the clear glow of the moon. I looked around. The more I saw, men, women, children. Robert was there now, boots squishing as he looked down at me. A pair of black goggles were over his eyes, a wicked grin on his face. He unslung his rifle and let it fall to the ground, then pulled the goggles off his face and cast them aside like toys. Disappointing. Very disappointing. I thought with you being a park ranger and all, you'd make it further. But here we are, at the creek. They never make it past the creek. Robert cracked his knuckles and pulled the knife from his belt. He held the knife in both hands and brought it down, aiming for my heart. I put up my hands to fight him, but it only delayed the inevitable. He worked free from my grasp and elbowed me in the head. My vision blurred once more. My arms went slack as he buried the knife in my chest. My lung collapsed as the blade went in, and with a grunt, he pulled the blade down, separating my torso down the middle in a nasty gushing mess. Satisfied, he got up and left me there to die. I tried to talk, but it all came out as gurgled whispers. What was that?" he mocked, and he knelt to hear me. With the last of my breath, I spoke my final 2 words, just loud enough for him to hear. Involuntary screams came next, loud and shrill, broken vocal cords shouting in a mixture of barking and screeching. With both hands, I pulled the large incision, yanking the flesh apart in a spray of blood and disintegrating organs. His reaction was the same as all others before him, a look of pure irrational fear. My thin, inky black limbs burst from the gaping wound in my torso. I was on him in an instant, slashing the knife away and digging my nails into his flesh. I ripped his shirt like paper and separated his chest just like he did to me, my piercing screeches ringing into the night until I burrowed so deep they could no longer be heard. He thrashed and oozed from every orifice as he made room for me, just as the cab driver did, and the park ranger before him. I ate and wriggled as he expired, worming and digging my tiny frame to each limb like a suit. When the fit was just right, I stood up and cracked my knuckles. I looked at my reflection in the water, running a hand over my new face to feel the fit. Better than the last one, for sure. I took my time going back to the estate, making sure my walk was just right and everything was in place. The hours passed as I settled in, feeling more and more at home as I worked the joints and muscles. At daybreak, I emerged from the tree line to find Charles on the patio waiting. He came to greet me immediately. "Sir, this one had you out all night. Was this one better than the others? Can I get you something to drink?" "Oh, much better than the last," I replied. "A bourbon, if you will."